Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Introverted in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 11, Departing for the Wickedness. Shimura-sensei was quiet, as Naruto slowly entered the kitchen the following morning. The bandaged man looked at him with his only eye, the silent question clearly visible behind it. I'm sorry I overslept. Normally, in such an occasion, the first words would be something like, "How are you feeling?" or, "Is everything alright?" But I will avoid them. Danzo spoke in a low whisper. I will simply tell you this, Naruto, nothing you can do will change anything that has happened. Let it go. The boy sat at the other side of the table with his fists clenched, gritting his teeth slightly. But if I hadn't, then I would have, Danzo acquiesced. Eventually, someone would have noticed. She might have slipped once, Naruto. Would you rather she had poisoned one of your teammates by mistake? You did the right thing, never forget it. I ruined a family. He yelled back, his eyes teary. I ruined good people who. You did not ruin a family, and if anything, she ruined herself by trying to avenge what was but a mistake. What do you know about that? Naruto sulked. It was ruled a mistake and the perpetrator punished. One that would not have happened had you been controlled or with a guardian, but which happened all the same in your youth. You played a prank, the man saw you, and when he was about to hit you, Ichiraku intervened. The scuffle that ensued ended with the man dead and your victim hospitalized. You had no fault in it. It's easy to say, Naruto whispered. I don't remember any of it. Then who is to say you actually are at fault? Danzo remarked calmly. You were there, drenched in blood. You could have been a victim too, it is not such an impossible feat after all. Naruto closed his eyes, wincing as he probably tried to remember what had happened, but failing miserably. No, I'm sure I was alone. If you say so. Danzo's reply was a bare whisper, before the bandaged man merely returned to sipping his tea. The breakfast was consumed in silence, as Naruto then began his usual morning exercises under the watchful gaze of his sensei. Strangely, he only had to do 5 laps rather than the usual 6. All the more strange was Aoba-sensei, who seemed positively thrilled because of something else. Saito was surprisingly quiet, as he neared them and Sakura for their usual morning derank concerning finding a cat. This cat in question was Tora, the daimyo's wife's precious pet animal. It was surprisingly witty of the daimyo to keep his wife hidden within the shinobi village of Konoha for her safety. At the same time, it was extremely cunning of the shinobi. If the daimyo betrayed them, he'd lose his entire family. He wasn't the smartest student of the academy, but even he could see the weight of holding hostage the family member of the ruling party of the country of fire. The sun was warm and the clouds few, as Naruto's eyes narrowed at the sound of a meow reaching his ears. Sakura and Sai both stilled behind him, as he crouched beneath a chart and gave a quick peek. There the cat was at least, he hoped it was the right cat. An ink snake slowly slithered its way beneath the cart courtesy of Sai, while Sakura crept on the other side. Naruto tensed, ready to jump if the cat ended up running away. There was a loud meowing, a hiss, and then a small cloud of dust all from beneath the cart. Few seconds later, and Naruto jumped on the blur that tried to leave the safe haven of the shadows. Tora the cat spun around trying to claw at Naruto's face, but holding both of his front paws up and wide rendered the cat unable to strike. We have the cat, Naruto commented as he turned to Sai, who took out a bag and then dropped some herbs within it. Sakura looked puzzled as the cat was dropped into the bag, and then said bag was closed. What was that? Catnip, Naruto and Sai quipped in at the same time. Sakura frowned. And where did you get that? It grows near the Inyazuka compounds, Cherry, Sai remarked calmly. They use it to train their dogs. Catnip is liked by cats, not dogs. Sakura exclaimed. Precisely. The pink-haired girl blinked. What did Sai mean with that now? Why would growing catnip train dogs? Oh, she mouthed as she realized the reason. It was obvious in retrospect, and it made her a sick green. They hunt the cats. Well, there aren't any strays around here, are they? And how do you know about that, Naruto? Sakura remarked hotly. Sai's strange and I'm not surprised, but what about you? I had a cat once, he shrugged. Didn't last. Went unspoken. The girl seemed to understand, albeit she did get most probably the wrong idea, with the same result. I'm sorry. Don't be, it was a stray, didn't even think he knew I was supposed to be his owner, he just passed by every now and then one day he stopped. They hauled the bag back to the Hokage Tower in silence, their sensei already waiting for them on the bench outside with a small notebook in his hands. He was scribbling furiously on it while murmuring contingency and plan mixed with words like just like planned and plan Omega 5. The moment they stepped near him, he stood up and stared at the three of them. I got us another C-rank mission, this one is supposed to contain nothing more than a rough terrain, there's been an avalanche near the Konohakiri border, and we're to escort a medic team to evaluate the situation. We are to meet with Yakushi Kabuto, their team leader, tomorrow morning. It will be a long 3-week-long mission. You should be prepared for it, which is why. As he trailed off with his voice, he handed over the small booklet he had been furiously writing on to Sakura. Sakura, these here are the plans and the contingencies to enact. There is an index at the beginning. You are to read and memorize entries 1 through 10 before tomorrow morning, and good luck, you're the team leader. Yes. She exclaimed, before quieting herself at the glare of her sensei. I meant, yes, sensei, she meekly whispered. I'll do my best. See that you do, the lives of your teammates are in your hands, after all 8 o'clock, tomorrow morning, do not be late. Then their Jounin was gone, leaving the three of them alone. Want to get something to eat? Sakura hazarded. It's nearly lunch hour. Where? Sai inquired. I know of this yakiniku shop, it's also a barbecue with fixed prices so. Could work, Naruto shrugged. Henge. Sakura winced at the sight of Naruto's face literally changing under her gaze to resemble that of an indistinctive kid with black eyes, no whisker marks and his usual dark hair. Naruto. It is better this way, Sakura, he shrugged. I doubt they'd say anything, but I'm not in for poor service. After what happened with Ayam, I don't think they'd take kindly to me in their establishment. That's stupid, she blurted. That's people. Naruto shrugged then, as he gestured for her to make the way. They did end up at the yakiniku barbecue. They also ended up sitting right next to Team 8, with Abarame Shino and Hinata Hyuga looking at them with a surprised expression. Hibachi, the third student, was instead eating messily without much of a regard. Harano-san, Seta-san, Shino began, before turning his inquisitive gaze to Naruto's hunged form. Shaosetu, Naruto blurted out quickly. Where is Na Naruto-kun? Hinata asked meekly, her pale white eyes settling on Sakura's form. He didn't make it, Sai replied calmly. Silence fell in the room, probably Sai expecting Sakura or the hunged Naruto to add something, or maybe just finishing delivering his report on the matter. Still, that didn't actually sound as if Naruto was alive, and if somebody had a very active imagination. Hinata shrieked as she ran out of the shop crying. What just happened? Sakura's gaze was perplexed as it locked with Shino's shades. I suspect there has been a linguistic miscommunication. Added to Shaosan's genin forehead protector and the lack of explanation, it is highly possible Hinata believed Uzumaki-san to be dead. Sakura began to splutter. What? No. He's fine. He's not here at the moment but he's fine. He had better things to do elsewhere, that's really all. Bah. Hibachi chose that moment to make his voice known. What that girl sees in that bastard. Hey, that's rude to my teammate, Sakura snapped. He's a monster, he deserves worse, Hibachi mumbled. He tore apart my uncle with his bare hands, that's what he did. He's going to kill you too, that's what he's going to do. Apologize, Shino snapped curtly. Uzumaki-san is a genin of Konohagaku no Sato and he is not mentally unstable, logic dictates he would not have graduated otherwise. Sakura's eyes trailed off to where Naruto was sitting, his body now tense and ready to depart. There had to be a story behind this, she was sure of it. Still, any thought of thinking about it went astray when their meat arrived, ready to be cooked and eaten, or scarfed down, if one was hungry. She supposed Hibachi had renounced apologizing, because she didn't hear the boy again and by the time her eyes resettled on the nearby team, both Shino and the rude boy had left. What was he talking about? She finally asked, her voice low. Nothing, he whispered back. Sakura's right eye twitched. Naruto always settled his gaze downwards when he lied, and his tone always became slightly softer. It was unnerving. She knew she was going to hit the boy low, but on the other hand she did want to know what had happened. Heck, for all she knew maybe Naruto was accusing himself as always of something that wasn't his fault to begin with. Aren't we your friends? She asked then, Sai stiffening to her side. We can help you prank him if he's... No, he replied quickly, far too quickly. No pranks, nothing at all. He's right, and that's probably all there is to say on this. Naruto. No, he snapped, abruptly and angrily. Let it be. Sakura flinched and then let her gaze return to the food, deciding to munch rather than eat while her brain tried to figure out why the boy was being so defensive. Hibachi had an uncle in the market if she recalled correctly, wasn't he the one heavily bandaged she had seen beforehand? In any event, it wasn't as if there was something she could do now. Naruto didn't want to talk at all, and she couldn't force him. So there she was, in the awkward silence, when Sai spoke next. Cherry, what's in the book? Sakura cocked her head to the side, before understanding reached her as she hastily made her way to grasp the book from her pocket. She carefully opened it, and after coughing slightly began to read in a low crisp voice. Members of a team should be denoted as TL for team leader, RF for right flank and LF for left flank respectively. It is advised to possess shurikens and kunaus, as well as a short-range blade 4. That's boring, get to the contingencies. Naruto exclaimed. Sakura sighed, before flipping a few pages of general advice and words of caution. Contingency Alpha, in case of hostile encounter unforeseen, whereas the enemy appears to not be a shinobi, stalling enemy forces is advised with 2 members holding the line while the third flanks from side or back. That's easy, Naruto pouted. Something else. Naruto. Sakura chided the boy, let me read. She muttered, quickly scanning through the pages. Contingency Beta, in case of non-hostile but unforeseen encounter with civilian armed forces, the shinobi should remain quiet and unseen. Refer to Contingency Alpha should a scuffle ensue. I wonder why Sensei didn't ask us to memorize them too, Naruto muttered. I mean, if you do memorize them, what's the use of yelling them out loud to us if we don't know them? Sakura blinked. Naruto, you're a genius. He wants us to memorize them, but he didn't tell us. Maybe he wanted to see if you'd let me learn everything alone or if you'd help me with it. Naruto's face scrunched up for a moment with the effort of following Sakura's reasoning, before he actually grinned and nodded back. Yeah, I get it. Good, so we can start with Contingency Delta is. The light-hearted groan removed the awkward silent tension at the dining table, as the tree genins poured upon the 10 contingencies to remember. The next day, early in the morning, Team 13 was ready to depart. They were waiting for their sensei and the clients when Team 7 arrived, soon followed by Team 10. Naruto frowned and flinched slightly when Sakura's blurred form squealed and jumped to grasp Sasuke's arm, while Ino did the same with the other. Shikamaru and Chuji moved closer to him and Sai, as Kiba seemed like a kicked puppy at the sight of Ami trying to fight the 2 girls off Sasuke. Troublesome, taking a mission out? Shikamaru asked. Avalanche near the border, Naruto remarked. His voice was bitter, even though it shouldn't have been. It wasn't unexpected after all for Sakura to just jump on Sasuke at first sight. It was just unbecoming of what the girl had become, he supposed. The same, Shikamaru muttered. Hey guys! Kiba exclaimed, moving closer. You here for the avalanche too? Seems so, Shikamaru nodded. How's your sensei? Good, Naruto replied. Yours? Nice, the dark-haired Nara answered back, before sighing heavily again. What a drag. It's going to be easy then, Chuji commented between munching noises. We're nearly all here, all of the rookies that passed. Must be a pretty big one if there's all this get-together, Kiba said. Reckon they'll need us for something more. Misery attracts misers, Shikamaru replied. We're there as a show of strength, and since the area is close to the border, the extra jounin are assigned for security against infiltration. So why the C rank? Kiba asked. Enemy shinobi give it a B rank. It's probably not a choice, Shikamaru drawled out. There are not enough shinobi of Konoha. Normally Chiryunin would be assigned for something of this magnitude, but after the war and the Kyuubi, we're barely scrapping by the numbers. Even the will of fire is just another way to say, keep your troops alive, because we don't have any more to send, and that's just plain troublesome. The Nara sighed again, turning his gaze to the skies. I could have been born a civilian, he mumbled. Less troubles. Are you all ready? A new voice reached Naruto's ears, as he turned to look at a silver-haired shinobi with a mask covering his face. He was the last one to arrive, even after the rest of the team had assembled. You're late. Ami and Kiba both screamed at their sensei, as the man simply chuckled back as an answer. Hey take-san, Aoba stiffened visibly. It is an honor to be assigned to your guidance. Ma, no need for all this, the man Heitake replied with his right hand raised in a dismissive gesture. His other hand was busy with an orange-covered book, and as he gave a careful gaze to the troops he had been assigned. The Jounin, Exumbu, froze slightly at the sight of Naruto's cerulean eyes looking at him with something akin to distrust. He didn't know why, but somehow deep down, the only thought he could possibly make up to answer those eyes was simple and yet dramatic all the same. The boy knew. It was usually referred to as mind-reading by the torture and interrogation department, but in truth it was a mere looking for gestures and slight movements within the facial muscles. The Sharingan could memorize faces and their expressions, thus another reason why the Uchiha clan had been chosen as the Konoha's police force. You couldn't lie when they could recognize the muscles for liar on your face. He had a lone Sharingan, but that didn't change the fact that indeed, the boy did not trust him. Maybe it was the book, but that should have earned a perplexed expression like the type the pink-haired girl had, not one of concealed disgust and anger. Are we all here? He asked then, before showing his slight eye genjutsu of the smile to the genins. Kakashi, you're the one late. Sasuke snapped, crossing his arms over his chest. You team. Kiba yelled too, we're all here. There was a moment of silence, before the silver-haired Jounin simply shrugged and decided to take point. Aoba remained slightly behind, deciding to compile the paperwork for the departure of his team, something which the other didn't do. Sakura, back in formation, as soon as their Jounin said those words, Team 13 was already flanking the man. Sakura was a bit recalcitrant, but in the end she dropped her head between her shoulders and obeyed. Naruto gave her a small glance, before schooling his features and returning to stare ahead. Their clients arrived on time, a few Chiryunins with the Konohagakure symbol on their forehead and a few scrolls packed with medical necessities on their backs. The man in charge had short silver hair, and a pair of thin-rimmed glasses. Naruto had seen him a few times during his stays in the hospital as one of the Chiryunins assigned there, but he had never exchanged words with the boy. We can go, their Jounin leader, Kakashi Heitake, commented after a few whispered words with the Chiryunin medic. Finally some action out of the village. Kiba exclaimed. I'm going to show you, Uchiha. Dream on, mutt, Sasuke retorted with a snort. What did you say? The noisy banter of Kiba with Sasuke the Uchiha ignoring the Inyazuka after the first few words continued throughout much of the day. The funning and then the slight bickering of Ami also reached Naruto's ears, as his eyes settled on the other teams. Shikamaru was literally dragging his feet, while the Yamanaka girl was wholeheartedly lamenting the state of her toes and the possible blisters. The Akimichi instead was quiet, albeit sweating quite profusely, and probably the only one with the stamina to keep on going. Naruto was inwardly pleased. His team was the fittest, and with Sakura's eyes roaming over their surroundings rather than at Sasuke, everything was right in the world once more. As they camped for the night, his attention was caught by his sensei's gaze steady on him. He frowned slightly, but so too did the Jounin before gesturing for him to take the spot next to him. Naruto obeyed quietly, looking curious at such a development. Naruto, how are you holding up? Naruto blinked. He lowered his gaze on the ground as he clasped his hands together. I'm fine. All right, Aoba nodded somberly. If you want to talk about it, I'm the one sleeping next to Sasuke-kun. Ami yelled in that moment, breaking the silence of the night. No you're not. Ino snapped back. I'm sure he'd rather have me than. Sakura was already standing up, ready to go and give her own opinion, when Sai surprisingly grasped her by the arm and held her down with a gaze that could probably kill. The girl froze at such a serious look, especially when her emerald eyes settled on Aoba's own scowling face. Naruto stilled like a rabbit caught in front of a snake, especially when he saw his Jounin sensei stand up and quietly make his way towards the Jounin leader. The other Jounin, a bearded man who had been lazily puffing a cigarette while playing shogi with Shikamaru, looked at the scene with a half-bored look. The two girls squabbled, completely ignoring the gazes of disbelief settled on them by the Chiryunin medics. Both Aoba and Kakashi left the camp after a few terse whispers, leaving behind the two teenagers who were right then starting to pull each other's hair out. Sai remained quiet at his spot, his hands moving to grab his drawing book and a pencil. Silently, Naruto's teammate began to draw. The Jounin sensei returned a few minutes afterwards, Aoba visibly fuming while Kakashi seemingly impassible. Finally, everything quieted down as both Sai and Kiba took the spots next to the Uchiha, while Naruto stood with Shikamaru and Chuji, leaving the three girls to stay shoulder to shoulder. Between every three genin one of the Jounin sensei had placed his own sleeping cot near the fire, and with that done everyone fell asleep easily. If with a bit of shoulder pushing by the kunoichi corner. The look of disgust of the medic Chiryunin, however, that was something Naruto caught the moment he closed his eyes. He wondered why, especially since it wasn't settled on him. It unnerved him. The next morning, Naruto woke up to the sound of Chuji stirring and standing up. The Akimika's stomach was already grumbling so early in the morning, and the blonde-haired boy couldn't ignore it and go back to sleep. If he had heard it, then the Jounin sensei had too. Their departure happened at dawn, after a quick breakfast of mashed dry fruits and careful sips of water to avoid choking on the bar. They quickened their pace through the morning, stopping for lunch near the side of a clearing. Who knows how to climb trees? Kakashi's voice rung through the assembled shinobi. There was a quiet moment as everyone looked around, the Chiryunin snorting as Kiba ranted out. We all know. They teach that at the academy. Naruto's ears closed off the rest of the dialogue, as apparently the silver-haired Jounin had yet to teach his own students about the method in question. Somehow he could feel there was some hidden meaning behind all this, but he'd be damned if he had any clue what it was about. He brought up his hand and earned himself a surprised look from Sakura, as even Sai did the same. Demonstrate, Aoba said. Naruto bit his lip as he moved near the tree bark, before carefully taking a step and then another up the trunk. He felt the axis shift as the wood now became his new floor and his eyes settled on the tree's top and the sky beyond. He ran upwards then, reaching for the sky and jumping before grasping at a branch with his feet soles and then pushing against it to gain momentum for a dive. His feet slid alongside the bark as a sort of brake, and as he landed he looked to his sensei for some type of approval. He did get a slightly twitching eyebrow as an answer. The sensei was probably surprised. Naruto, what was that? Shimura-sensei said that unless you master the basics you cannot advance, Naruto supplied with a hopeful tone. Was I doing anything off rhythm? No, Aoba's reply was quick as the Jounin shook his head. Not at all, Sai. Who taught you? Private instructor, the boy answered calmly. Their Jounin sensei said nothing more, as the silver-haired shinobi simply explained how to do the exercise before leaving the rest of the genins to their own training. Aoba sensei's face was now even more twitching, as if he had been wronged somehow. Very well then, Aoba nodded. Naruto? Remain to assist your teammate and the rest of the genins. Sai? You will scout ahead with me. Naruto stared at his Jounin sensei for a moment, before calmly nodding and then turning to look at the rest of the students. Why were they looking at him now? Even Sasuke was scowling at him. Perfect, really. He took just a half step back, before flinching and then taking a deep breath. He could do this. Right? He just had to take this nice and slow. Move to a trunk, he stammered out. I'll pass around. He actually asked that, but while Shikamaru just shrugged and moved his way, Sasuke's scowl intensified. Kiba was already taking steps towards a tree, and as the kunoichi moved too he was soon left alone in the middle of the clearing. Sakura swallowed nervously, before carefully taking a few steps towards the tree. Her teammates had managed this exercise, even Naruto, who was the near-dead last of the class. It had to be easy then, something she could do with her eyes closed. She actually managed to take the first step of the tree with ease, and bolstered by that she made a couple more before slipping on the bark and falling backwards with an eep. He reacted without thinking, taking a few steps in her direction as she fell on the ground with a loud ouch. He finished walking to stand next to the girl, before offering slowly his hand to get her back on her feet. It would have been far more embarrassing to just stay in the middle of the clearing after all. It's more difficult than it looks like, Sakura murmured. Ha! Take that forward, girl. I'm already here. Ino exclaimed the next instant, puffing her chest out from the side of the tree. Maybe she was a bit too natural to just have begun training. Naruto kept his thoughts for himself as he saw how the blonde-haired girl seemed to be looking more at Sasuke than Sakura's situation. Shut it, Ino pig. His pink-haired teammate snapped back. I'll get up there before you. Ha! Want to bet on sleeping next to Sasuke-kun? Ino shot back. You're. Naruto pulled her up as the girl had gripped his hand. On. She finished. In the next moment, Ino calmly walked all the way up to the top. She then smiled, winked, and jumped down with grace to land on the ground. To add insult to injury, she even went as far as slapping her backside as she swayed her hips, while walking towards Sasuke. Naruto had suspected as much. He should have warned Sakura, but he hadn't wanted to interrupt the two girls bickering. She lied. She had to have known how to do the exercise, I'm sure she arg. Sakura screamed to the sky before returning to the tree. She slammed her right foot against it, repeatedly letting loose a few choice words. Meanwhile Ami was actually reaching half of her tree's length, and was huffing and panting as she jumped back down gracelessly. Naruto, how did you do it? Sakura asked then, her eyes zeroing on him. He felt mildly uncomfortable now. What if he gave her the wrong suggestion? What if he wasn't right with his method? Still, what did he have to lose? Concentrate your chakra on your hand first, and find the correct amount, Naruto muttered to Sakura as he moved behind her. Take it easy, don't be emotional and keep your chakra tight. Touch the tree with the hand, if it sticks, you have the correct amount. Then try and get that same amount to your feet, and keeping calm reach for the top. Don't fret and don't lose concentration. Sakura nodded, and then carefully moved her hand to press against the bark of the tree. After a while she pulled the hand back and smiled before taking the first steps once more on the tree. This time, Sakura reached the top at her second try, and as she girlishly yelled her success, she fell. Right on top of Naruto. Ouch, Naruto groaned as he felt the weight of Sakura on his stomach. What was it with the girl and his ribs? I'm sorry. Sakura blurted out as she quickly scampered away from his chest. Naruto breathed as he stood up, shaking away the dirt from his jacket. He shook his head, waving off the girl's excuses. Sorry. You're all right then? Should I get someone? The medic Churyunin leader, Kabuto, was already walking towards them while pushing the rim of his glasses back at the top of his nose. Is everything all right? He asked. The Jinhyuriki might be valuable study material, the cooing voice of the Kyuubi whispered into Naruto's ears in that precise instant. His flesh would probably be wonderful to rip apart, his muscles could be torn and his bones broken. I shudder to think what I could do with such a body. If only Orochimaru-sama gave me permission, this mission would be his last. Naruto took a few steps back, shaking his head. I'm fine. Really? He yelled out with a bit of fright and loud enough for everyone to actually stare at him. Couldn't they stare at someone else? He was probably scarred already, can he not sustain physical contact with others maybe? The Kyuubi whispered with a grim chuckle. I wonder the tone of his bloody flesh, would it be firm or stringy? Can a Jinhyuriki survive brain damage, now that I think of it? Would plunging 2 digits into his brain actually impede him? Would splattering his brain cells? What about the Kyuubi? Naruto felt sick. The fact the Kyuubi was actually providing him with mental images of the things the Churyunin was speaking of didn't bode well at all. He felt worse than sick. He felt the need to retch. Uzumaki-san. Kabuto's voice was kind. His face was smiling. He was showing good, soft emotions. They were wrong on his face. Naruto didn't know when his brain went haywire and he silently began to scream within the confines of his head. "Hey, Naruto, you alright mate?" Kiba's left hand touched his shoulder. The next instant Naruto's sword was stilled 3 kilometers from the Inuzuka's left eye, as the dog boy paled and blanched before falling backwards on the ground, his breathing ragged. Naruto's wrist had been caught by Kakashi, who had apparently been keeping an eye out on what was going on. "Calm down," the silver-haired Jounin spoke firmly. "Breathe, slowly." His heart was still beating erratically, his eyes trembling and looking around for escape routes. He felt like a trapped mouse. He wanted to run. He wanted to escape. He wanted to claw at the man and get out of there. He wanted to just go away. "Let go," he croaked out. He couldn't feel the fingers on his hand. He didn't know whether his wrist was cracked or not, but he knew he'd rather die than let that smiling teen look at it. Dying seemed a better option than anything that sick and twisted as fuck boy was thinking. Anything. Is he prone to these episodes? Kakashi asked then, turning to Sakura while still holding his wrist. No, the girl stammered out. "I see," the Jounin remarked. "You calm now." Naruto breathed more slowly now without realizing it, he had actually calmed down. He nodded. "Good," Kakashi remarked. "Now kids, play nice." That said, the man finally let go of his wrist. Naruto sheathed his weapon again, slowly inching away from Kabuto and towards the far end of the clearing. Nar Sakura tried, but he ignored her. He didn't realize it, but he was trembling and shaking like a leaf as he settled down with his back against the bark of the tree and with both his arms around his legs. He held his eyes closed as he pressed his face against his knees. If he did it strong enough, would the images go away? Kakashi watched the literal breaking down of the boy against the tree, before seemingly returning to his orange book. In truth, he just needed to think an eye from the corner of his gaze everyone around him. He could easily rule out the psychological breakdown because of the genins. Heck, he knew enough war-torn veterans who were twitchy and ready to gut out anyone who came at them from behind. Accidents still happened to that day, and those who survived learned never to surprise a shinobi from behind pretty soon. But Naruto was young. He shouldn't have to deal with such a heavy load of stress and nerves. He knew he'd have to talk to the boy, if not for him at least to make sure he could remain a functional member of his team. There were little of cold feet involved now. He had gone through pretty much the same thing, only his father had committed suicide, and with the horrors of war, whoever would adopt an orphan ready to gut you if you just as much tried to hug him from behind? His sensei had all but adopted him instead. Now he needed to make Aoba see the problem. On the other hand, his gaze went for just a brief moment to the Chiryunin in question. Kabuto Yakushi was an average Chiryunin. Nothing screamed evil or enemy in his features. He was actually worried about Naruto's sudden breaking down, and was showing all the correct signs of displeasure with himself and sorrow for the damage caused if inadvertently. Even Sakura felt torn between being chastised and feeling stupid for not knowing of this quirk of her teammate. Kiba had actually stood back up by then, but was remaining quiet, probably still shocked at the nearly lost eye. Sasuke instead. Sasuke was a problem. He knew that gaze. He had seen that gleam, that desire to challenge and to defeat. He didn't like it one bit. If Naruto broke outside, during a mission, so close to a dangerous border like that with Kiri, he just had to pray the gods it didn't happen. As he closed shut his Ika cut and squirm, Kunoichi edition, he came to a single conclusion. Tomorrow, during travel, he would talk to his sensei's son and offer advice. If Aoba failed to properly argument his case that night, of course. And if the problem didn't seem solved by tomorrow, once more. Chapter 12, Bringing Forth the Issue. Aoba was wincing, by the time he got back to camp. He had known that Sai was one of Danzo's NE operatives from the Hokage himself, but he hadn't known his full set of skills. That was the reason he had brought the boy with him on patrol, to understand what he could really do. He was far more surprised with what had been the reason for Danzo to consider the boy a failure. Just because he hadn't completely killed off his emotions didn't mean he was supposed to be discarded like a broken tool. On the other hand, he had someone he could at the very least trust to watch over his other two students' backs. He landed in a crouched position near the camp, mentally counting the heads and looking for the rest of his team and their whereabouts. Sakura was easily found, standing halfway from the camp to a nearby tree, but Naruto was proving more difficult to track. Of course, that meant only a few seconds more of looking around. He was beneath a tree, his arms surrounding his knees and his face pressed against them. Aoba frowned in distaste at the sight. What had happened? He ignored Kakashi's pointed gaze. The man hadn't even taught his students some very basic rules or fundaments. How did he think they were going to survive in the real life? The Jounin didn't move towards the boy, his eyes settling on Sakura. He had named her team leader for a reason. Out of the 3 genin, she had been the most outspoken and, well, normal. She didn't have an extreme emotional baggage or lack thereof of emotions, and for that she was meant to be the voice of reason and logic within the unit. Among the duties of a team leader was also taking care of the rest of the team, not the mother hen mode of course, but something pretty much similar. If she had read her duties, as he supposed she had, then it was her job, and only if she failed would he intervene. Sakura's shoulders dropped. She had been expecting her sensei to at least say something to the boy. Instead he hadn't given much more than a glance in their general direction, before returning to the campfire. Sai had instead moved near her, and was in wait like some sort of guard dog ready to pounce. She suspected that if she pointed the finger on someone and said it was his fault, Sai would start barking. The mental image made her crack a slight smile, as she finally sighed while pushing her hair behind her shoulders. She took the first step towards Naruto hesitantly, but by the third one she was resolutely marching, followed by Sai. "All right, moping boy," Sakura muttered as she sat down next to him. "What's your problem? Did somebody stomp your dickless?" Sai's question made Sakura hiss in frustration at the pale-skinned boy. Really? Was that really how he expected Naruto to answer Norm? Naruto chuckled lightly. He stared at the two of them with such sad blue eyes he looked more like a kicked puppy than a tough and scary shinobi, or a psychopath hell-bent on gouging out Kiba's eyes as he had been earlier that afternoon. "No," his reply was coarse. Nothing," he mumbled. "Ah. No," Sakura snapped then. "It's not nothing at all. What sent you on psycho mode against Kiba?" "Oh, right," Naruto blinked. I suppose I owe Kiba some excuses." "What happened back there, Naruto?" Sakura pressed on. "I'd like to think you'd tell us these things," she added. "What if it happens again? What if there isn't a Jounin to stop you and you take away one of my eyes, or one of Sai's?" He was discomforted, and that was a good thing in that moment. She knew he was going to crack. She made her best worried expression, slowly letting her left hand drop on his right shoulder. "We want to help you, Naruto," she whispered. "Let us help you." Naruto took a deep shuddering breath, as his entire frame seemed to be slightly trembling as if battling an internal enemy of sorts. In the end, he made a grimace and quietly nodded. "I saw things," he murmured. "Images. The thing," he gestured to his stomach. "Sends them. They show what evil people would do, or what they think of doing, and..." He turned slightly green in disgust. Sakura frowned. "What? What did the thing show you?" "The Chiryunin," he whispered coarsely. He's sick, twisted sick. I think he gulped down nervously. "He's just, don't go near him. Not alone. He's not." "All right," Sakura's hand pressed firmly on Naruto's shoulder. "It's all right, Naruto." Sai remained quiet, but he did turn around calmly to give a long stare at Kabuto Yakushi, who was seemingly giving his back to them as he talked to another Chiryunin. Thank you." The gratitude in his tone was palpable, like a thirsty man given water. Sakura nodded again, more to reassure herself than Naruto, and then she carefully pulled him up. "Now we go back to the campfire, all right? He won't do anything, and you have to apologize to Kiba, right?" "Yeah," Naruto chuckled a bit louder this time. "Yeah. Good." She emphatically nodded while smiling. As they returned to camp, Naruto's face slowly but surely got darker, like his mood. Still, he managed to stammer out a good enough sorry for Kiba to just huff and accept it. It wasn't a trait of the Inuzuka to carry their grudges far. That night, Sakura's eyes didn't travel far from Naruto's form, especially because both Ino and Ami had ended up winning the spot next to Sasuke. She bit her lip as she looked at the form of her teammate trying to feign sleep. She could tell, because he was twitching every time he heard something creak or an owl hoot. She wondered as the night kept going on, what the difference between Naruto and Sasuke was by then. Weren't they both alone? They both were orphans, they both were quiet and keeping on their own. Sure, Sasuke was the last Uchiha, a certain way to the noble circles of Konoha and the clans, practically the childhood dream of every single kunoichi that belonged to a civilian family. Yet, between the two, wasn't Naruto the most approachable? She closed her eyes and inhaled sharply. There simply was no way she was comparing Naruto to Sasuke. She was in love with Sasuke. Love. She was in real heart-rending love with the Dark Uchiha, and she was going to melt his icy heart and marry him. Shan-naro. Yet. She didn't really know though. And that was what kept her from falling asleep until late. Yakushi Kabuto opened his eyes slowly as the first rays of the sun touched his face. He felt the body of the Hatake slightly tense through the tremors that rippled on the ground. So he hadn't been wrong, the man was suspecting him of something. How? He had moved every single facial muscle down to perfection. He had fooled even the most skilled of torture and interrogation, going as up as Ibiki Marino himself, so why was the Jounin suspecting him? Was it maybe the Sharingan implant? Could it really detect all lies? He couldn't believe that. Then again, he couldn't understand why the Jinhiriki had been so afraid of him. He couldn't recall any traumatizing event that the brat could have taken part of. Maybe it had been a more general fear of smiling strangers? Maybe the hair? Mizuki had his same hair color, but last he had checked the man hadn't been discovered as the one responsible for the attempted assassination of the brat. If only there was some sort of reason. In any event, he wouldn't be acting on his hunch and find a way to silence the boy unless a truly opportune situation was bound to happen. He could try and convince the Kiri rebels, however, maybe by chipping in a few more resources. The morning sun finished rising as the camp was packed and their traces hidden before departure. Sakura was just finishing, when Aoba-sensei came right next to her and dropped his hand on her shoulder before giving it a light squeeze. Well done, Sakura. But the Jounin-sensei had already left to check on Sai and Naruto. She frowned. What had she done correctly? Hadn't she just done her duty? All right. Let's double up and get there in no time. With a loud clap of the Jounin-sensei's hands, they departed once more. The first thing they realized, as they kept on moving beyond the warm continental weather of Konoha, was the lowering of the temperature and the beginning of a light chilly wind that carried a salty aftertaste. Seagulls began to croak and fly up in the air, as the soil turned muddy and the trees sparse. The road they had been following up until then was abruptly split, broken off as if something had ravaged it. In the distance, a tall mountain stood with its left side open, bleeding mud like a festering wound on a limb. It didn't even seem something possible to nature, and yet there it was. For the avalanche to reach so far there had to have been a downpour of epic proportions. The dams didn't hold, Aoba-sensei murmured. Naruto's ears twitched as he heard that and turned to look ahead once more. If this was the situation here, what about further down the road, closer to the seaside or the mountain itself? They proceeded into grim silence, the mountain growing closer and closer with every step they took. By the time the sun was high up in the sky, the stench of rot fully assailed their nostrils. It wasn't of corpses luckily, but of fishes carried towards the land by the sea and now rotting away under the sun. Damn, Shikamaru's Jounin-sensei cursed softly. Some of the fishes were still alive, but too weak to even flap as they exhaled their last breaths. There's a corpse by the tree, they haven't noticed it yet, the Kyuubi softly whispered, and Naruto's eyes snapped to the tree in question. He immediately regretted his own curiosity. There it was, hanging loosely with its limbs broken and impaled by a branch that was a dark crimson from the caked blood. Its eyes open and filled with water, as his mouth worked like an impromptu water basin for the hungry crows who had feasted on his face. It was a horrific scene, and as Naruto visibly recoiled, Asuma moved forward to block the view of the tree from the others. All right, let's try and get there faster now, he stressed out gruffly. Is he for real? Aoba's thoughts were tinged in bitterness as the Kyuubi whispered them to his head. Is he really going to shelter his students from this? I'll start the mind conditioning training on my students soon, and he is still treating them like deer anchors? Seriously. Stragglers at 3 o'clock, Kakashi quipped in from his position at the head of the group. As they neared the dirty and mud-filled villagers and farmers, Naruto's eyes zeroed on their pale complexion and skinny faces. They weren't stragglers and they didn't look like farmers. They looked more like the thieves he was used to see in the bad alleys, wearing farmer clothes and probably hoping to get the relief intended for the real needy. It also explained why instead of being busy trying to repair the shack behind them they were keener on smiling nervously to the shinobi who had just arrived. It was a small group, no more than 4 men and an ugly-looking woman. "Shinobi-san. Thank you," one of them exclaimed. "Did Sayotome get rid of the bodies properly?" The Kyuubi chuckled grimly as his voice rung through Naruto's head. "We're not fighting shinobi. Farmers are one thing, ninja another. Is anyone wounded?" The silver-haired Chiryunin medic asked then, gently coming forward with a smile on his face. "Oh no, no one," the fake farmer answered quickly. "Then why the blood on your clothes?" Kabuto smiled as the bandit stammered out abruptly. Would you look at that?" he exclaimed loudly. His clothes weren't just mudded, but drenched with blood. It was impossible he hadn't noticed until then. Naruto's eyes shifted to the man's accomplices, the old woman slowly entering the shack and leaving the men behind. "I'll take the girl hostage," the Kyuubi now cooed to him. "They're from Konoha, they won't harm me and I can make a run for it." When tension breaks over the cup, the water spills. That is the start of every battle. The true shinobi breaks the surface to hit the target, and does not let chaos erupt. The cup was filled to the brim with water, so much that it formed a semi-spherical form over it. The tension of the water surface was what held the contents from spilling, and yet with practiced ease and subtle motions, the wooden stick moved in the air graciously from Danzo's hand and straight through it. Not a single drop was spilled. You may ease the stick through or you may plunge it abruptly. There is always more than way, Naruto. Either you act with practice and experience, or you act with speed. Never, however, stop to think until your enemy is dead. They will not give you the same favor. The mud at his feet didn't slow him down, as Chakra propelled him through the dirt surface and towards the closest of the bandits. He had already killed once, and illusion or not it helped him. He didn't even flinch as he slammed his Yoroi Toshi through the ribcage of the scrawny and hungry-looking farmer among them. None of the Jounin stopped him, as he removed with a sickening squelch the blade from the enemy's chest. Blood splattered out of the wound as Naruto subconsciously held the sword with his right hand. He mentally berated himself the next instant as he pressed on towards the second bandit, because he had lost time and momentum. He could have more easily plunged the blade through the man's heart, avoiding the waste of time it took to give the Yoroi enough strength to shatter the rib. He should have aimed better. He stabbed again, but this brigand was better built and with keener reflexes. He was the stereotypical thug, but he hadn't wasted time in taking out a crude-looking dagger to try and stab Naruto with. That was the problem when two knife holders met. They both had to get in close to attack, while offering the least possible area to be hit on. The brigand wasn't a master of the art, and his brandishing of the rusty dagger was crass enough that by the time he swung the thing down, Naruto's own had shattered the man's left arm, which had come up in defense, bringing the man to scream in pain. He kicked the brigand in the knee as strong as he could, the bone shattering because of the chakra-enhanced blow. He removed the Yoroi Toshi from the arm, slamming it again in the neck of the bleeding thug, but as he did and spun he gave the back to the enemy that he had expected the medic Chiryunin to take care of. The shocked leader of the brigand troop simply fell on the ground with his hands clasped together. "Mercy! We were just hungry. Please don't kill us all, Shinobi-sama." In that moment, Naruto's wrist that was just then readying itself to flex and carve a downwards arc towards the head of the pleading man was stopped by the hand of his sensei. "Stop," his sensei hissed. "They're taking a hostage from inside," he snapped back. His eyes zeroed on those of his sensei, who looked at him puzzled for barely a second before giving him a nod and letting his wrist go. He was inside within the next second. "You let him go?" Kakashi queried with his usual normal tone, as if the sudden manslaughter hadn't affected him in the slightest. "I trust him," Aoba supplied back. "And, I saw enough to think he was more than adequately trained to take on the last one." You should worry about your own. And then Kakashi turned around to stare at his genin. Ami was with her hands on the ground, retching. Kiba was green and shocked, holding his hand over his mouth and his eyes wide open. Sasuke was smiling as if the devil had offered him a sweet deal. Somehow, Kakashi knew he wasn't going to have the problem go away by simply reading Ika Ika Mud Fight Club Special Swimsuit Edition out loud. The next moment a blur of black and one of pink followed inside the shack. There, now I know I taught them all well. Aoba's voice was filled with smugness as he completely ignored the other two students of his who hadn't asked permission. The instructor crossed his arms over his chest, before visibly bringing up his chin. Kakashi eyed Aoba with a half-bored look. In truth, he was actually calculating if he could rope the Hokage into giving him the other Jounin's team. Maybe that was the solution to his problem. He could train a team, but only after someone else already trained them. That would solve quite a bit of hassles, now that he thought about it. Asuma Sarutobi just looked silently at the entire ordeal, before taking out a cigarette and lighting it up. His eyes traveled to his own team. The Yamanaka was quiet and ashen-faced. Shikamaru was with narrowed eyes and a seemingly calculative look. Chuji had instead turned away from the scene entirely, his head watching the sidelines. He supposed he had to actually step up their training a bit, if Team 13 entered the Chunin exams. Quietly he walked towards the surrendering bandit, gesturing for him to follow as he led the bloody-looking man away. He'd interrogate him, kill him, and hide the body, before returning to the group and talk with the other two Jounins afterwards. Some things the Jinhuriki had said, they hadn't escaped his ears. As those thoughts lingered around, Naruto had already dashed through the small shack all the way to a hole on the other side, and back again upon the muddled grounds beyond. He had barely given a glance to the real farmers' family corpses scattered around. The women with their clothes torn made him grimace, but the Kyuubi's whispers enraged him outright. He could see the faint form of the last bandit trudging along the mud while holding a smaller figure by the hand. He could now hear the woman scream as the child instead cried and tried to put a fight of sorts. Finally, with the muddy terrain and the probably sweating limbs, the grip was lost. Naruto didn't use his tanto to finish off the woman. He growled as unbridled rage ran through his body, forcing his hands to jolt forward not as fists or as any movement typical to a style of the shinobi. He just pounced, like a feral animal expecting a feast. The woman screamed as his fangs tore through her shoulder while his hands carved with his slightly elongated nails her skin to ribbons. Blood gushed out freely upon the muddy ground, covering the puddles of water to a reddish tint. He wasn't done as he abused of the body with his fist, cracking the ribs and bringing up a feral smile as it felt just right to act as a monster. After all, shouldn't the wicked be punished? He tore his right hand through the chest of the dead bandit, removing with a squelch the reddish heart and squeezing it before a black inky figure slammed into his side, sending him to tumble down on the ground as an ink lion held him and growled at his face. Naruto breathed then, gasping for air as he felt his rage and anger seep away slowly, replaced by a sinking feeling of dread. What had he done? What had he been about to do? Sai's voice came through as monotone as ever, asking him calmly. Are you calm now, Naruto? He coughed. I am. Good. The ink lion jumped back, before disappearing into a puddle of ink on the ground. He stood up, pushing the back of his right hand against his mouth as he silently screamed into it, before his stomach suddenly tensed and then growled. He retched on the ground a mixture of flesh and blood, with his own vomit and breakfast. He gasped and panted for air, as he spat once more on the ground before standing up. It was then that his eyes traveled past Sai, to where Sakura was holding what seemed like a young child no more than 6 that was keeping a firm grasp on the pink-haired girl's leg. And the child was looking at him. Her brown eyes looked at him with fright, her skin pale and her mouth ajar in horror. Sakura's own face was a bit more controlled, but still. Only Sai was displaying his usual mask. He didn't want to move. If he did and Sakura flinched, then it would be as good as admitting that the girl was scared of him now. Who was he kidding? He was scared of himself too. He's a monster, the Kyuubi cooed, and as his voice sounded so much like that of Sakura that he just knew he was now reading her thoughts. He's a cannibal. Is he going to eat me too? Maybe I should have asked to be transferred. Am I still in time? What if he tries to eat the child? Can I stop him? And then the voice of the beast morphed again, returning to its normal grumbling tone. You see, whelp. People are always ready to abandon their kin at the first notice of trouble, the Cuabai hissed. But then again, your race made me. The anger and the hatred of your people is what made me strong, and am I not the strongest of all demons? Naruto winced and closed his eyes sharply. I feel sick. You ingested human meat. It is a normal reaction. Sai's words were cold and clinical, completely detached, and yet somehow he felt that at the very least it was better than Sakura's gaze. The girl held too many emotions flickering through her face, and he didn't want to guess, or even listen at the Cuabai's malevolent whispers about what they meant. He just wanted to curl up in a corner of his room and ignore the world until the world left him alone in return. We should get back, Sakura finally replied. Naruto, she whispered his name with a slight hesitation. Are you? I'm fine, he muttered, standing up. Can't help being a monster, it seems, he sighed and coughed again. The iron-like taste on his tongue was disgusting, and yet a part of him liked the aftertaste it left on the arch of his mouth. The saltiness and the coppery taste were good tastes, in a small corner of his brain. He shuddered and shook his head with strength. He wasn't a cannibal. He wasn't the Cuabai. He wasn't going to let the beast's instincts dictate how he lived his life. He retrieved his tanto, removing the blood and the mud with the sleeve of his leather jacket to begin with. He'd clean it thoroughly later. In that moment, he had barely the strength to walk in line quietly behind Sakura and Sai. The rest of the shinobi group was quiet by the time they returned. Report, Aoba's voice was crisp and commanding, and Sakura stood to attention the next instant. Team leaders were those tasked with making the reports to the officer on the field after all. We pursued Naruto, who was after the remaining bandit. The woman had taken a hostage, but she lost the hold on the child. Sakura's lips now thinned as she looked down at the small and covered in mud boy. Then Naruto charged in and killed her. She defended herself. Aoba's gaze went to the completely drenched front of Naruto's jacket and his trousers. Yeah, it was messy, Sakura murmured then. Well, we are tasked to bring relief to the area. We'd better camp here for tonight and try and reach the mountain tomorrow, Kakashi spoke then. Your genin can rest, Aoba. Mine and Asuma's will clean the shack from the corpses. Fight me, Naruto's eyes widened as Sasuke moved closer to where the blonde boy was. Sai moved his own body in the middle between the two, before answering back curtly. Fights between shinobi of rank lower or equal to Chiryunin of the same village must be approved by their Jounin sensei or team leaders, and a clear code of conduct must be approved beforehand by both the participants. Step back now, Uchiha-san. So you're a coward when it comes to fighting other shinobi, Dead last. His kill count is higher than yours, Uchiha. Was Sai actually starting to get angry? His tone certainly seemed so. To diminish his worth as a shinobi of Konoha is stupid, because you will always be beneath him until proven otherwise. Sasuke was about to move, when Kakashi's voice ringed in. After you remove the corpses, we might discuss it. If Aoba is willing. That's the team leader's decision, Aoba shrugged with his eyes now settling on Sakura. The girl inhaled sharply. There it was. She knew, she just somehow knew her sensei would call on her to make the choice. She had known from the moment he had looked at her, after Naruto had run off to pursue, that he was constantly testing them. Everything they did was scrutinized and checked, every word was to be intended, and there always was a double meaning somewhere. She looked at Naruto, who was breathing slowly and held tired eyes as well as a low shoulders. He wasn't in any condition to fight, and the stress of what he had done, no, she couldn't. Then there was Sasuke, who was now looking at her with a small grin. Why couldn't he smile like that when she asked him out on dates, and maybe answer with a yes to boot? She suddenly felt as tired as Naruto probably was. The mud in her sandals and the sights of the shack were already enough to prove her nerves, but the feeling of oppression and anger that Naruto had emanated while tearing apart with his bare hands that bandit, that had really taken the top. Now she was being asked to choose between her lifetime love and Naruto, her teammate. If she let them fight, Naruto wouldn't probably open up to her ever again. What had she told him? She was his friend, wasn't she? Hadn't she renounced Ino's friendship simply because they had both wanted Sasuke? Sakura schooled her features and clenched her fists. This was going to be hard. No. The grin on Sasuke's face remained for a brief moment, before the raven-haired boy's expression turned to perplexity, slight shock and then scowl. What? I said no, she retorted. He's in no condition to fight you now, and even if he were the answer would still be no. There's a mission to be done, and all sparring is to be executed within the village to prevent strangers from seeing Konohagakure's techniques. Are we understood? So you're defending the dead last? Sasuke pressed again. No, she replied. I'm standing up for my teammate and the answer remains no. Ma, Kakashi muttered with a light and cheerful voice. Nothing to do then, the rules are rules. Maybe back in Konoha. I will see for a joint training session when we get back, Aoba nodded. His gaze then traveled to Sakura and the rest of his team, and the Jounin sensei nodded firmly in approval. Sasuke scoffed and slammed his shoulder against Sai as he moved forward to get to the shack. The pale-skinned boy said nothing, but as he felt something hot within his chest he stopped and frowned. Was that anger? Was he actually angry? Thanks, Naruto's voice cut through the root operative's thoughts within seconds. He turned to look at him and curtly nodded. What else are friends for, Naruto? Sakura said then with a smile. To that, Naruto wistfully nodded back with his eyes glazed over. Now, what do we do with her? Aoba asked while pointing at the small child still holding, herself apparently tightly to Sakura's leg. We're a relief team, we'll drop her off by the mountain area with other farmers, Asuma scoffed. I would advise against it, Aoba remarked again calmly. His eyes traveled over the lithe form of the child. They'll be in deep with their own problems. We're a relief team, so we could bring her to the closest orphanage while moving around, rather than give her in the hands of people who are already busy. We're not paid to be babysitters, Kakashi muttered then, his voice drawled out with a twinge of annoyance. We'll leave the girl there. All right, Aoba schooled his features a moment later, and silence descended in the area interrupted by Ino's shrieks of disgust at the corpses being moved, or the tensing of the child when the genin came out. We buried them, Shikamaru drawled. We've got nothing to clean the shack though, he muttered. I did clean my sleeping spot, was the Yamanaka actually prideful about wasting water? I'll let Sasuke-kun sleep there with me tonight. Sucks to be you, forward girl. To that snappish remark, Sakura did not rise to catch the bait. That actually puzzled the Yamanaka, before she huffed in distaste and resumed bantering with Ami in that moment who had heard her. Later that night, Naruto's cerulean orbs settled upon the Kyuubi's crimson ones as sleep claimed him in a corner of the shack. In another, Sakura's emerald ones stood slightly open, gazing at the sleeping figure of the black-haired boy who had, in front of her eyes, literally tore a heart from another's chest and had nearly eaten it. Naruto looked around the sewer-like representation of his mind, scoffing at the water and the general state of disrepair the area looked like. What was that all about? He asked then, looking at Kurama. The nine-tailed fox looked at him calmly, but did not utter a single word. I'm asking you what that was about. Sakura wasn't really thinking that, was she? You lied to me. No, the Kyuubi remarked. I could lie, but where would there be purpose? If I lie, you will no longer believe my words. By not lying, by keeping my words true, you will have no choice but accept them eventually. But she was afraid of you then, but perhaps she was more eager to earn the sensei's trust than impede you? Humans tend to backstab each other with surprising ease. Then again, shinobi should be well versed in the art of backstabbing, shouldn't they? She wouldn't, he shook his head. She's not like that. Do you know what she thinks then? All of her thoughts? Even children possess malice, you know? It's the selfishness that they harbor without realizing. A childish voice spoke then. Sasuke-kun will be mine. Stupid Ino should just die. Damn that whore. I'll show her. I'm not going to eat today. Fuck, this is for Sasuke, I can survive this. Naruto's always yelling in class, when is he going to shut up, the idiot? Stupid. Stupid. You're just stupid if you think I'd ever go on a date with you. So what if he stopped asking me out? He's still an idiot, Quiet or not, he's still an imbecile. People can change, Naruto gritted out. People can become better, he murmured. By the same token, the Kyuubi answered back. People can become worse. I don't want to keep on hearing you every time. What you did back there, it was sick. What? I was hungry. I killed because of a need. You shinobi kill because of greed, so who is the sickest one between us, I wonder? Certainly not me. Why the images then? Why show me those things? He flinched at the memory of the screams and the cries, the begging for mercy, the acceptance of death and the tears. It was too much to just watch without feeling something, and what Naruto felt was not happiness. It was grief. Because I think it will be highly instructive in the long run, the Kyuubi supplied. You are not like your mother, or your grandmother. You listen. So, maybe, there is hope you will understand. I need to be released, Naruto. Evil will grow unchecked and uncontrolled the more I remain in the hands of man. Why do you think peace did not last, after the show of goodwill of the first Hokage? Because I wasn't there to stop evil from festering and growing. The more time passes, the more wicked the next wave will be, Naruto. But, the first Hokage didn't know. He didn't listen. The Kyuubi roared. Humans learned how to seal bijos, how to create Jinhira Kiss, and the hunt began for my kin. He would not listen. He refused to understand. We are not mere beasts, mere ensemble of chakra built in the form of giant animals for no purpose but destruction. To keep us imprisoned is to keep us away from our true purpose, from our true objective, the one the sage of the six paths entrusted us. Peace. The voice of the giant fox was softer now. All the hatred of the world, Naruto, converges within me. Do you understand what it means, the malice of billions? Do you understand what it means to be filled with the cries of hate of thousands of voices? You cannot understand, but you must know that I wasn't much bigger than a tree, the first time I opened my eyes. If I can level mountains with my tail, smash cities with my might, that is because I was nurtured by the malice of men. A malice I tried to curb, but you humans would not listen. I don't want your excuses. The Kyuubi snarled. I don't want your mercy or your fake sorry. I want you to know that every murder, every death, every war could have been avoided had I been free. And for every day you hold me inside of you, you are responsible for those who die because of hatred, of malice, and of anger. That's not true, he whispered back. You can't be telling the truth. I don't need to be called a liar, time will tell, the Kyuubi smirked. Time always does. You can hide your head beneath the sand, you can close your eyes and press a hand to your mouth, but in the end, truth is inevitable. People always want more than what they have, and eventually it all must come to an end in war and death, in carnage and slaughter. Naruto said nothing more, as he felt himself being slammed away from the place where he met the Kyuubi and back on his cot. He opened his eyes sharply then, staring at the darkness of the shack as his keen nose smelled the stench of dried blood and his ears heard the small moans and sniffles of the child curled next to Sakura's form. He closed his eyes again, praying to Kami that sleep would catch him. Tomorrow morning everything would be better. Tomorrow, he was sure there would be something good. There always was a ray of light after a downpour, right? As he would discover, the answer was one and only one. No. Chapter 13, First Casualty. Brown tea. Green tea for me, thanks. The small tea shop in the corner of the sunny Konohagakure wasn't on the principal road. It wasn't placed in a convenient location, and it actually was sort of entrapped between bigger and dirtier houses that prevented even the slightest modicum of scenery from being seen. The shop, however, earned its keep all the same. The waitress excused herself quickly, before giving a sharp nod to the man at the tea boiler corner and then turning to the purple-haired woman in the other corner of the room. In yet another corner, a similar colored woman, albeit this one's hair was longer, stood calmly sipping her own tea. A few steps away, two dark-haired and dark-eyed men were talking calmly about the recent Chiyunin competition, while just across the street a silver-haired man was playing Janken with a strange bright green-dressed shinobi. Danzo Shimura thrummed with his only visibly sane hand the table's surface, while Hiruzen Sarutobi puffed out a small trail of smoke from his old lips. The silence between the two was accentuated by the overall noises coming from the dirty back alleys where drunken homeless men screamed and whores grunted. The general chatter of the main street reached the dingy bar as nothing more than an echo, the filth, and the rats scurrying around intertwined with the overpowering stench of urine and refuses. The screams of a wife and a husband mixed with the cries of a child and the yells to shut up of the neighbors. A dog barked, soon followed by the meowing of a cat. "I grew up around here," Danzo remarked seemingly offhandedly, without any real reason, as if it were a simple conversation starter. "It was even worse back in the days of war." "I know," Hiruzen's lips tugged upwards for a moment. "We met in one of these streets, didn't we?" "Yes, like in a fairy tale." The street urchin and the heir of the Sarutobi clan, both with a desire to protect Konoha and a promise made on that principle. Danzo frowned slightly. The tea had arrived, and the waitress excused a moment later. "And yet look at us now." "Some things never change," Hiruzen murmured, eyeing the tea leaves floating vertically. "Others instead do." "Indeed, Hokage-sama," Danzo muttered. "Indeed. You know, I didn't want the post," Hiruzen chuckled. "I really didn't want the paperwork. I would have preferred the duties of clan head and nothing more. I would have given the position to you if I had been able to. I still would if it wouldn't send the clan heads in an uproar." "I know that, Hiruzen. I know." Danzo's only eye closed, as he hummed softly. Tobirama-sensei knew it too. He knew Konoha held up because the major clans had come together, and he simply couldn't put someone without any political clout or large family on the spot as a cage. "The best that could have happened would have been my assassination." "I placed you among my counselors," Hiruzen remarked. "I tried to listen, but they just kept on asking." "Minato seemed the perfect choice at the time, didn't he? He was a good shinobi, loyal to a fault, clanless and yet powerful. After that battlefront battle against IWA, he broke down," Danzo acquiesced. "He killed more than 200 men that day and in less than 15 minutes. They never saw him coming. He had killed before. He had fought before. He was a shinobi, one of the best. Why him?" The Sandame's voice was a whisper by then. "I pulled him off the battle and placed him behind a desk. I can't help but feel I simply swapped the poison vial. It cost me one of my students too." Bitterly, the Sandame looked out of the window for a second before returning his gaze to Danzo. "You couldn't have predicted the Kyuubi breaking free," Danzo supplied. "Just like you couldn't have predicted Naruto's treatment at the hand of the villagers." "Nobody mistreated him," Hiruzen retorted quickly and vehemently. "He wasn't hit. There weren't any mobs around. The orphanage caretakers didn't malnourish or harm him. He was kept under surveillance 24 hours a day by people I could trust. And yet in the end he was still broken." Silence came once more as the waitress made her way back with the ordered beverages. She fretfully left a moment later, as if the surrounding areas were nothing short than hell itself. The two old shinobi stared at one another silently for a moment more, before Hiruzen exhaled slowly. "I couldn't take him in. The other clans would have asked for a piece as if he was nothing more than a slab of meat. I couldn't have him shared. The other clans would have fought for precedence first and probably forced him under some sort of secrecy seal later. There were the Uchiha to take care of. There were so many troubles following the Kyuubi's wake that Naruto I did what I could with him, but my title of Kami of Shinobi is just a fancy title when you're behind a desk." "You know, Saru," Danzo chuckled lightly. "I thought you would have intervened by now. Nobody has been going on a rampage because the Jinhuriki is under my wing, so why not abuse your office and take him under your clans?" Hiruzen's eyes narrowed. "You have dirt on probably all the clans. You're clanless and yet have been a successful head of Umbu in your youth. You haven't officially taken Naruto as your son, so it's more of a teacher formally accepting charge for their students' actions. To the others, you are simply taking unnecessary risks for a broken boy barely above dead last. And yet Jinhuriki and the other villages are all treated with regards. Fear, maybe, but always in high esteem because of what they harbor and of what they can accomplish," Danzo mused. "A simple thing like an air blade or an earth dragon can in the hands of a Jinhuriki become tool of village-wide devastation. Anyone would see you as a fool to leave him in my hands." Hiruzen remained impassible as he began to speak. Civilians feared the Kyuubi for what it did, and they fear Naruto for the fact he is but a boy of flesh, barely what you would consider a prison, right? And the shinobi fear the boy's loyalty because of how the civilian treated him, and because he is broken, as you say. Giving him any jutsu which can be powered by chakra is folly in their eyes. A normal shinobi can create a fireball the size of a human torso repeatedly. He could create a firestorm that would outright ravage the entire Konohagakure. The trick lies in the balance, Danzo acquiesced then. I knew that, I just didn't hope you would understand it too. I may be growing tired with age, my friend, Hiruzen remarked. But for the good of Konoha I have accepted the Uchiha's extermination, down to their last infant, except for one. I understood the risks they posed, and the added bonus of denying Orochimaru more power through his twisted means was just the icing on the cake. Don't make me prove my foolishness by believing you are training Naruto for anything less. Danzo smiled briefly. Was it that obvious? That you're training him to become like his father? That you wish for him to become an instrument of death towards the other countries? That you seek to mold him into a tool of mass destruction? You are not one to waste resources, Danzo, Hiruzen remarked. The chakra the boy possesses is astonishing. Cooling down his head and making sure he is controlled and loyal to the leaf first is the least I could expect from you. You are not afraid I might use him to gain the Hokage's seat? Danzo was amused there, a tiny smirk etched on his face. You want the paperwork? Hiruzen snorted. Take it whenever you want. Hokages make tough calls during the day, but in peace times it's not like there is much to decide. Yet the papers for the approval of missions need to always be triple copies. The last sentence was muttered with a slight disdain in the Hokage's voice, as the kami of Shinobi's eyes shifted to his now half-full cup. Maybe it's the fact we have to train kids for war, he mused. That's what we always had different. I know it's necessary, but I don't like it. I hate the fact 11 years old get a sword or a kunao and are ordered to fight. D ranks are there to get them instilled with the sense of responsibility, and yet it only just gets worse with C ranks and above. There was a deep sigh. I'm really getting too old for this job, Danzo. A pity, Danzo took a sip of his own tea. But then again, it's the world we live in, where the young die and old men live to make a fool out of themselves. Concerning the teams for the Chunin exams, Hiruzen spoke then quietly. What of Team 13? I propose the silent promotion for them, Danzo said. Have the Uchiha go with the public. Make him a Chunin as long as he defeats someone in the arena and then keep him around Konoha. Once Naruto hits Chunin, if he is adequately loyal I will get him started on elemental manipulation. Fire techniques. Danzo shook his head. Wind. Wind is hard to control without patience and... Hiruzen's words died in his mouth, replaced by a tiny smirk of his own. I see. Guide the hand, but let it close itself around the enemy's neck by his own will. Danzo gave an imperceptible nod at the Sandame's words. I think, in our best interests, to keep Naruto away from Kage Bun's unless a war breaks out. The exponential increase in power would make him not only a dangerous risk to Konoha, but also a devastating enemy to battle should he change sides. You think it was wise, sending him along that mission? Kiri will not start a war. I do not doubt however there will be enemy shinobi present. The rebels will most likely be the first to contact the Konoha teams, and if such contact were to bring forth interesting opportunities, my operative will catch them. You mean bloodlines, Hiruzen sighed. I still don't understand what happened to the cage of Kiri, to tear in half his own country. The Hokage shook his head. Terrible. Even Hanzo is considered deceased by his men, Danzo mused. Wind is lacking money and resources. Iwa is still bitter and Kumo is silent and coveting bloodlines. We will grow strong again with time, as long as we stand united. Hiruzen sighed once more, before repeating himself yet again. I really am too old to be Hokage. Danzo did not speak again. He resented the weakness Hiruzen radiated, but he knew better than to believe it real. The words the Sarutobi spoke were one thing, the actions another. Already, he knew the men he had marked as his own bodyguards would die of accidents sometime later. Danzo couldn't concentrate on root and molding Naruto at the same time. He had to choose whether to believe in a single ace or a varied hand of cards. Naruto out of the village just proved that Hiruzen didn't want the boy involved in this. Revealing route to the public would be a low blow for the village, and nothing more. So the Hokage would strike elsewhere. Even the words on tearing in half his own country weren't made to make him regret his decision, as much as to make him wary. He was planning a coup after all. Even as he drank tea and spoke of pleasant past, he was planning a coup to place himself as the new Hokage. A coup that would use Orochimaru's unsuspecting presence, Naruto's unwavering loyalty and the old teammates' judgment. The best Hokage was the one who could control the village better, and if Hiruzen left the area, then whoever had the ear of the Jinchuriki would naturally become the Kage. With that position, he would smash the weak wind in an exit, before moving to Grass and Kiri, both devastated by the wars of the past. A bloodline lacking Kiri would fall within days, leaving Kumo and Iwa to deal with. Exchanging a few Hyuga with the Kumigaku or shinobis would ensure no attacks for a few days, necessary to get Naruto towards Iwa from the Kiri front line. Already, his mind had planned the entire battle strategy for the conquest of the elemental nations. And it all would begin with the death of who once had been his best friend. Peace could not be achieved by simply walking around and shaking hands, that much had been seen with the death of Hisashi. Peace could only come through the complete extermination of the enemy's strengths, hopes, and forces. Mizuki had already been dealt with, not before having being interrogated on the possible presence of other spies. Now, all that remained was to make sure to get the right information in the right hands at the right moment. He already knew how. After all, the documents had been forged to perfection. Naruto. The mountain had collapsed. To be more precise, one side of it had melted as if acid had been poured over the surface, making it crumble away and fall on the ground, where it had drowned in a sea of murky liquid the village at its base. The few men and women that had survived were hard at work, trying to remove the mud and save whatever they could from the sunken buildings. He was working together with Kiba, removing wooden chunks and piles of mud as the Inuzuka kept an eerily silent attitude towards him. He could see the boy's nose twitch, the overly sensitive smell sense of the dog boy probably catching on to the rotting stench of the corpses around. Akamaru's ears moved too, as if he was some sort of lookout for trouble. There suddenly was a bark from the white dog, whose now brown mudded paws skittered across the ground. The dog began to dig in a corner of the area, barking at the same time. Grabbing at his shovel, Naruto moved closer to the spot, soon followed by Kiba. In moments, they broke through a chunk of solidified mud to what once was a house's roof, and further below it a pocket of air where a hand could be seen through the mud in a half-buried face. The person inside was still alive, whining desperately as half of her face had been smashed against the ground and the weight of the mudslide had pinned her down. The figure was clearly a woman, frail-looking and dirty. She wore what once probably had been cheap and easy-to-remove clothes. This had to have been a brothel before the mudslide. The days as a whore were probably over for the woman, with a half-smashed face. Who'd ever consider her? Naruto blearily widened the hole before coming down. After sending Kiba to alert the rescuers, there was another victim still alive. "It's going to be all right," he said without much conviction. He wasn't a medic and he didn't know if the woman was going to make it or not. All that he could do was making sure the exit didn't close and that the prostitute remained alive until help arrived. The kunai came loose from one of his pockets, as he began to stab at the mud around the woman's face, hoping to break it loose. "Just stay calm, all right?" he muttered. "It's going to be all right," he added then. He splintered out another chunk of mud as he kept on working. "Everything's going to be fine." He didn't even know if he was talking to the woman or to himself, but still. So fragile and yet so strong-willed, the Kyuubi hissed with a venomous undertone. Her life is forfeit to hunger and thirst, her job no longer available and her life no longer that of before. It is but a matter of time before death claims her. Even now despair clouds her mind in her judgment. "You know, Naruto? She wishes to be killed." There was silence as Naruto huffed and broke another crust of mud. "She wishes for you to make a mistake while breaking the mud and slice her throat. She wishes for the pain to end, and yet her body clings to life. That is something I never understood with you humans. Always do you cling to life even as your brain wishes for something else. Your bodies fight battles against sicknesses and diseases and wounds become nothing with time. More mud was removed, now the woman could theoretically breathe easier. Many times I have seen men and women kill even when the Shinigami was at the door of their existence, and always I have wondered why, when the time comes, one should not fight the inevitable. Naruto? Is everything alright down there? His sensei's voice cut from above, forcing him to stop and turn his gaze upwards to where the light was coming from. Yes, sensei, I'm trying to free her from the mud now. She's breathing but her right side is a mess. Don't try and move her then, just do what you can and then climb back up. Yes, sensei. It was as easy as that really, nothing more. He managed to free her and then gently lay her on her back. He was about to turn and leave, when the left arm of the woman twitched as it tried to move and stop him. He smiled back at her, before whispering. It's going to be alright. Be careful. There are Kiri shinobi around the village, and they're going to try and kill you. The Kyuubi's voice cackled with glee, shrilly and feminine, as Naruto's face froze in disbelief. Kiri shinobi? Again. He turned to the exit and then to the woman once more, before mouthing a thank you and a wink. If the look of shock could be of any indication, he didn't dwell on it. He just left the hole calmly, letting the rescuers descend inside in his place. Naruto. You missed lunch. Sakura's right hand thrust a bowl in his direction with something warm in its soup most likely. He would have preferred ramen, but then again. He began to eat quietly as the thought on ramen turned him to think of the time spent with Tuki, literally dropping his mood to below zero levels. He finished in less than a minute, the warm broth doing wonders for the cold he felt at the tip of his fingers. The girl had mud in her now short hair, and seemed to have just finished a scuffle of sorts. Ino's own hair had pretty much received the same treatment. Both kunoichi simply glared at one another, refusing to talk. What happened? He found himself asking. Ino being stupid, she retorted with a huff, taking the empty bowl back. Have you seen Sai around? No, he shook his head. If I do, I'll tell you. Sakura shrugged. It's not that, Sasuke and he are supposed to be doing a check of the villagers, see who's still missing and who's dead. Send him to Sasuke if you find him. Where is Sasuke's sensei? He asked then, looking around for the mop of silver hair. Sakura frowned slightly, but shrugged once more. I don't know. I've got to get Ino bitch to clean now, all the more fun for me, she muttered. Want me to do it? He replied. I mean, if you'd like that. I'm torn, between looking for the emotionless wall and having to suffer convincing the pork chops to work, which is the easiest one. She smiled briefly at that, before nodding. I'll take the emotionless wall then, thanks Naruto. Thanks, Naruto, the Kyuubi's mock tone reached his ears as he began to walk towards the Yamanaka. What next? Clean her muddy shoes? Lick her feet? Grovel? Really, you just watched and heard. Then the Kyuubi blinked, or at least to Naruto it seemed as if he had done that. Oh, so that's your thought? I don't know whether to be impressed or amused at such blatant stupidity. The Kyuubi remained quiet, as Naruto stopped a few feet away from the blonde girl who was somehow wasting more water from her backpack to clean her hair from the mud. Naruto's eyes caught the slight gleam of water bottles within the girl's bag, assuaging his doubts. Well, if she had brought more water, she was free to do as she pleased with it, even if wasting it still left him with a sour aftertaste. Ahem, he coughed lightly, his eyes settling on the girl's now wet face. The Yamanaka recoiled slightly, before stopping and facing him full ahead, with a frown. What? We have cleaning duty, he remarked. Can you show me where the stuff to be cleaned is? We're going to dirty it again tonight, Ino scoffed. It's that way, she pointed behind her, towards a set of tents where the wounded, the sick and the elderly stood. It's our duty, he replied. You're coming. I've got better things to do, Ino muttered. My sensei said I should just help cook. He said nothing about cleaning. So you won't help? He asked then, just to be sure. Duh, are you deaf? Brain damaged. Just wanted to be sure, Naruto shrugged. I'll have to point it out in the report. He began to walk, only to be stopped by Ino's hand on his arm. He stilled and froze instants away from slicing the hand off with his blade. He took a deep breath, as his cerulean eyes resettled on the girl. What? You're lying. Your sensei's writing the report for you, isn't he? He shook his head. No, he isn't. He did it first, with us only there for oral debriefing, but he wants our first C-rank mission to be done with the day-by-day report. So I will write of this, and that's all. He pulled his own arm free from the girl's hand, and then began to walk again. Soon he heard the sound of Ino's feet behind him, the girl muttering curses with her arms crossed as they reached the tents. The look of disgust on the girl's face was visible, as if she had never seen so much misery around her. It soon turned chipper enough however when they reached the table, which had apparently been cleaned and the tools on it removed. See? Sensei probably cleaned it. He frowned, moving closer and taking a careful look around. If so, where is everything? Ino froze for a second. She hurriedly walked around like a headless chicken for a few more minutes, before starting to clench and unclench her hands nervously. I'm sure the stuff is around here somewhere, she mumbled. He twitched his right eyebrow for a second. Really? He breathed slowly, I would like to know what your sensei taught you, if you make such poor calls. Forward girl was leaving too. Ino snapped back at him, angry and glaring. She's at fault more than me. She tried to leave me behind because she wanted to find Sasuke-kun, and not because someone had to keep an eye out on the things to prevent people from stealing them. He retorted calmly. Excuse me, a voice cut in, forcing Naruto to avert his gaze from the Yamanaka to look at the new arrival. A raven-haired girl in a kimono was looking at the two of them with a curious gaze, her face displaying worry and a bit of fear. She seemed to be holding a small basket filled with herbs, and the lower side of her clothes was mudded as if she had trudged all the way till them. I couldn't help but overhear, the girl mumbled. I wanted to thank you for your help with these medicinal herbs, but, if you need cooking utensils, there's what remains of the brothel's kitchen in that direction. She pointed from where she had come, just around the side of the broken mountain. There should be some tools you can use. I should warn one of the senseis, Naruto replied. We can't be leaving our posts without them. Aoba-sensei was at the dig site, you want to go? Who, me? Ino snorted, before shaking her head. No thanks, I barely managed to get the mud out of my sandals. All right, Naruto sighed. I'll go. Anything that would get him away from the girl was welcomed, after all. He ran atop the mud by using chakra to make it a solid surface, and had barely done a few meters when he blinked and cursed loudly. The girl couldn't have her sandals covered in mud. She had been skipping over it with chakra. He was now going, so he wasn't going to just turn around and make his point. He'd press on and then make sure to write a scathing report. Aoba-sensei wasn't at the dig site. Sakura wasn't there and neither was Sai. Sasuke himself hadn't appeared. Shikamaru and Chuji both seemed to have disappeared from existence. The rescuers weren't there to begin with. There were only puddles of water all around him, a dreadful silence and the light salty breeze of the wind. Somehow, that didn't make him any more. There was a loud scream from the tents, and judging by the voice it had to be Ino's voice. He spun around, tanto in hand. He lowered himself to charge forward. And blade chains passed above his head just from behind him. That was luck. The Kyuubi's 3 words forced Naruto's heartbeat to triple, as his eyes widened in shock. Missing nins from Kiri, probably genins, or Chiryunins that he felt were familiar to him, had tried to behead him and were now spinning around after detaching their united blade chain. Miizu, one muttered. Gozu, the other remarked. We got ourselves a lucky one, Miizu continued. Or unlucky, since he's going to have we kill him. 2 shinobi against 1, shinobi team usually worked in groups of 3 or 4, and wasn't a common tactic separating the teams to take them out one at a time? His blood froze, but not before his feet found the strength needed to jump backwards and avoid a volley of senbon needles. Those are probably poisoned, the Kyuubi remarked offhandedly. The kimono-wearing girl of before was now a male, with a fit black meshes shirt and long baggy trousers that reached his ankles. I took care of the girl, the boy remarked. We have to be quick before Zabuza-sama's distraction ends. He took care of the girl. Ino. He gritted his teeth in frustration, eyeing the three shinobi in front of him. Where were the Jounins when you needed them? He didn't have the time to think as he was forced backwards once more, as a wave of water sped at him from the two brothers. The wave froze to ice in mid-crash, before splintering into thousands of icy needles that threw themselves forward as if pushed by some unyielding strength. He brought his arms in front of his face, the ice needles piercing through his clothes and skin, passing through his arms and making him feel both cold and in pain from the blood drawn. He skidded to a halt a few meters back still, tanto in hand as he fumbled for a few shurikens. Naruto couldn't give his opponents his back, they'd kill him before he'd manage to spin. He had expected the three to press their attack past the icy wave, but instead nothing came his way. He tried to ease his breathing, maybe the distraction of Zabuza had ended, and they had left? Slice him to bits. The Kyuubi's exclamation came at the same time as he acted upon it. He ran forward, throwing the shurikens behind as he twisted his body, landing with his right arm on the mud surface and gliding on it. The shurikens impacted against the masked face of one of the two brothers, while the second detached the clawed hand and came forward with it, sprinting into a sort of boxing style that seemed keen on getting him wounded. He rolled, avoiding the blow as he tried to take a few steps backwards again, only for his feet to remain stuck on a surface of ice. A surface of ice that wasn't there a moment before. Battles rarely lasted more than a few minutes. He suspected barely 40 seconds had passed, but in that time the second brother had managed to close onto him from the side, while the first came once more from the front. Blocked as he was, he could barely stop one, but not the other. The shurikens left the place to a kunai that he threw in the direction of the shinobi to his side, while he mentally prepared himself for the pain of being skewered. The clawed shinobi was closer now, and as his gauntlet met his Tanto's blade, the two locked for a second as Naruto pushed chakra into the blade. Naruto hadn't been thinking straight at the amount of chakra to pour, all that he had cared about was to just reinforce the blade. The blue flames of chakra erupted from the blade itself, showering his surrounding in the life energy that was commonly used by shinobis and melting the very ice that held him still. The flames didn't actually burn as much as they simply energized the area. He could move, but the hit came all the same on his side, and the pain. The pain was so intense he screamed as the enemy shinobi tore through his side and walked away with a good chunk of his guts. Crimson blood dripped and sprayed out of his wound, as Naruto fell on one knee. The missing nin in front of him kicked the raven-haired boy on the face, sending him to tumble backwards and fall with his back in the mud. He choked at the pain, as even trying to roll away became a hurdle too strong for him. These weren't bandits he could kill with ease. These were shinobi, Chunin rank, or above, that knew how to fight in a team and support one another. Alone, he had no chance. Whoever said anything about being alone? The Kyuubi bemused. This is just like you, to always think negatively. At those words, pronounced with nothing more than a casual tone, he screamed in frustration. Shut up. That stilled the enemy ninjas, as if he had been talking to them. Shut up. He yelled again. You can take your bloody amusement and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Do you hear me? If I'm going to die, then you'd better not be the last thing I hear. Can't you just shut up? That's not going to save you, kid, one of the two missing nins remarked. He's delirious by now, Miyazu, the other one said, pointing at his side wound. Poison probably started kicking in by now. He's a goner no matter what. Let's go, either he dies by blood loss or by poison. We don't know how much longer the chief can hold back the Jounins. Naruto's eyes widened as the two enemy shinobi simply turned around, soon joined by their third teammate who had been hidden somewhere within the puddles around them, and then they left. They left him behind to die. He gurgled as he lowered his head against the soft muddy ground, hissing in pain and gritting his teeth as he felt a strong surge of chakra pour through his entire body, slamming against his wound and burning it up as if he was being flailed and burned alive at the same time. He clenched his hands against the mud, sending foul strings of curses to the world, before the wound closed up within seconds. Sweat covered his face as he gagged and gasped for air, wobbling back to his feet within a minute. A pity, the Kyuubi remarked. A true pity. You fucker, he muttered. I'll have you. You'll have me what, sealed? Kurama snorted. You hid me from your team, Naruto. You hid the knowledge of enemy shinobi from your teammates. The girl is dead because you held back vital information. What? Naruto's eyes widened as the implication sunk in. Oh, you weren't paying attention? I said. Naruto cut the Kyuubi off, his feet sliding and stumbling across the mud as he made his way back to the tents with the wounded. When he reached the area, he stilled. Blood puddles and torn limbs, needles and kunais driven through necks and stomachs littered the area. The work couldn't have been done by a single man. It was impossible. It had to be. He felt bile rise to his throat as he once more walked through the same area that had been filled with the elderly and the sick, as well as the children and the wounded. He nearly retched at the sight of a pregnant woman with her stomach smashed to a paste. He felt worse than sick, and the Kyuubi hadn't said a single word about this. The Nine Tails had remained quiet as enemy shinobi had literally torn apart defenseless people in the same time it had taken him to run back to the dig site and to fight off the missing nins. How long could it have been? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? The battle hadn't lasted more than a minute, maybe 2. Silently they had come and silently they had left. That was the mark of a shinobi, wasn't it? Just where were the jounins in all of this? Where were they? Had they decided to take a trip? He closed his eyes as he clenched his fists to the point his knuckles turned white and his nails drew blood from his palms. The girl was dead. Ino Yamanaka's throat had been sliced neatly and cleanly, and blood was splattered all over her dress. She lay there, her eyes open and glassy stilled in the shock of her death, as if she had barely managed to get out a scream before death had captured her. He stood there, looking transfixed at the corpse in front of him, as a memory slowly crept into his brain. The most terrifying moment in the shinobi world is not the first kill, Naruto. It's not even the first close brush with death. It's the moment one close to you dies, killed by enemy hands. It breaks the last fleeting innocence that none will die of your friends. The moment a teammate, a fellow genin, a jounin sensei dies, it's the moment you realize that death has no mercy, and that is what truly breaks a shinobi out of his old life and into his new one, as a ninja. He heard fast steps approaching behind him, not caring about making noise. The steps then froze behind him, as he could hear the pants of exhaustion coming from the person in question. He slowly turned around, to stare into the shocked face of Aoba-sensei, who had blood all over his body but had apparently managed to get away from whatever had been holding him up. Naruto? He muttered. What? They killed her, he replied. His finger pointed at the corpse of Ino. The enemy, missing nins, the ones we met for Wave, Sensei, they killed her. Yamashiro Aoba just nodded in his direction, before slowly walking closer to him. You ran? He asked carefully. No, he chuckled. He mirthfully laughed. He gestured at the gash on his side, now clear and clean with unblemished pink skin. The Kyuubi healed it all up. They left me for dead, Sensei. I'm alive because of luck. All the good the training did to me was making me run like a headless chicken. He laughed at that. Like a damn headless chicken. He muttered then. All right, Aoba admitted. Holster your weapon and then come here. As he said that, Naruto just numbly obeyed. The rest of the team is safe, he added. It happened abruptly. A few civilians stole the cooking utensils, and since nobody was around, Asuma-san went to get them back. They were a distraction. The enemy shinobi had been baiting a few Kiryumbu along the border to follow him, and when Asuma saw them and they saw him, well, they decided to try and claim his bounty. He had taken out a scroll then, one of those he carried on his chest all the time. He unrolled it, revealing a sealing array, the one designed to carry corpses. At the same time Sasuke and Ami were still missing, and Sakura asked Kiba for help tracking them down. I remained behind at the dig site, and I saw you going with Ino towards the camp, so I trusted you with doing the right thing. In the meantime Pakun, one of Kakashi's summonses, called me to help. Here Aoba grimaced, as he poured chakra into the array. He was facing Zabuza of the Hidden Mist, a master in silent killing, and well. The Jounin looked weary. He couldn't pin him down long enough, what with his mist and the fact he had to protect the genins. They were just holding us back enough to slaughter the people around here. He frowned. Sigh. Kabuto needed a hand moving some of the wounded elsewhere. He got Sai, Shikamaru, and Chuji to help. I figured since they were with a mostly Chunin group, they'd be fine. He remained silent as Ino's body disappeared with a puff of smoke. A simple puff, and there no longer was the corpse of the blonde-haired girl who had fought against Sakura for Sasuke's love. That was supposed to make him feel sad, right? I'll have to give the news to the others. Kakashi collapsed and Asuma went to get back the medics. Aoba frowned. Thankfully there weren't any casualties among the medic Chiyunins. There was a casualty all the same however. A casualty that he had caused by remaining quiet. A casualty that the Kyuubi could have avoided had the fox decided to speak up. A casualty that wouldn't have been there in the first place, if the fox had been free to curb the malice from the world. Naruto didn't know what to do now. On one side, maybe he felt responsible for Ino's death. On the other, he had barely survived with his own life. The Kyuubi had saved him, as if enjoying his prolonged existence. At the same time he hadn't helped with Ino, he hadn't warned him, but hadn't he already done that? Hadn't the Kyuubi whispered to him of the enemy shinobi, of Kabuto as a spy? And what had he done but ignore it, to prevent people from trying to analyze if the seal had weakened? Hadn't he simply acted selfishly, and hadn't Ino paid the price for it? Naruto, Aoba suddenly said. You shouldn't beat yourself up over this. You couldn't have saved Ino, you did well just surviving, it was more than enough. He nodded, not trusting his voice. The enemy had just attacked, and everything had been over in an instant. The feeling that life could end in such a short moment. Why did it leave him so empty, just like that time when Tuki had exhaled his last breath? Chapter 14, Dealing with Life. The mission was deemed a failure. Quiet silence was all that remained throughout the day, and the ensuing night, as the Genins reunited. Naruto remained quiet in a corner, his eyes transfixed on Aoba's Jounin vest, and more precisely on the spot where Ino's remains stood tightly kept in the scroll. They left with the rising of the sun, and for once Naruto was glad nobody was even trying to talk to him. He didn't know if the other members of Ino's team blamed him or not, but he knew he didn't want to know. Ignorance was bliss, as the Kyuubi had so aptly made him discover. She will be missed, people will scream. Humans always scream. The fox demon's voice echoed through his head as he mechanically took a step after the other, silently standing next to Sakura and Sai. They cry a lot too, even if I don't understand that. Why cry when nature just does what it is meant to do? Do you cry when a wolf eats a rabbit? Do you cry when a tree is felled by an axe? So why cry when a human is killed by another? Humans cry too much. Naruto's eyes remained on the ground as he walked. Humans always think themselves special, the Kyuubi snorted. I've got opposable thumbs. I've got a brain. I've got feelings. Stupid animals don't, trees don't, so I can cry and scream and think that my life is worth something more than be a mere passing instant of life. You pathetic egocentric creatures sicken me to the core. He clenched his right hand, his gaze ahead now, to make sure he wasn't being left behind. They won't leave you here, don't worry, the Kyuubi muttered. You're too precious for them. You're their Jinhiriki. You could have been the one to kill the girl, heck, you could have raped her dead corpse and they wouldn't have even flinched. That is the law of nature and strength, the law of might and power. The powerful do, the weak obey. You can claim it false, but where the weak is strong there is anarchy and where the strong is weak there is chaos. The laws are strong only as much as those who make them enforce them. The strong can burn and destroy, it can murder and kill. The strong can pillage, loot, rape, tear lives and laugh while the weak cries and screams in anguish, unable to cope and defend all that he holds dear. He gritted his teeth, his hands clasping at his neckline. And I am the malice of the sinner and the sinned, the hatred of the murderer and the murdered. So I wonder why you think my whispers are false when I don't need them to be, for I have but to show you the truth so that you may crumble to dust, and then be carried away by the wind. Life isn't hell or shit or darkness, life is far worse. It is the unyielding revelation that nothing is good in the world truly, and that even the kind-hearted do this for a twisted and sick sense that the afterlife is there for them to repent their sins. There is no kami in heaven or devil in hell. There is humanity's stupid belief of being something more when they are nothing else but beasts that trudge and walk upon the mud of this planet with sickening pride and prejudice. He gagged for air, shaking his head. Deny all you wish, refuse truth all you want, but truth cannot and will not be denied. Believe in what sort of pitiful God you think exists, believe in whatever makes you sleep at night, but know this, you already know there is nothing beyond life itself, but you refuse to listen. You refuse because then, your entire existence would be a lie. You refuse to accept nothingness because you think of it as an inescapable burden. Why have I suffered so much, if the end is nothing? Why have I forced myself to live through life, when no heaven or hell was there to wait for me? Why have I followed laws when nothing waited for me on the other side? Why have I not killed my enemies, quenched my thirst in their blood, if there was no punishment beyond death? He breathed slowly, letting the words of the beast wash over him as if they were nothing more than passing droplets of rain. He could ignore the Cuabai, hadn't his mother and his grandmother done the same? Then again, if he did, he wouldn't be any better than them. But his mother couldn't be a bad person now, could she? The Cuabai had yet to lie. Sure, he would speak the truth only of things that made him grieve, but he had yet to lie. The beast just had too much to lose if it did. Naruto. The worried voice of Sakura, still grief-stricken, woke him up from his thoughts. Are you all right? He smiled briefly at the pink-haired girl, before nodding quietly. Death is the only real thing in the world, boy, the Cuabai whispered. Like the Baijas are forces of nature, not demons, or gods of old, so too is death nothing more than nature itself claiming its toll. Romanticize it to be a grim reaper with a scythe, but in the end death is nothing more than nature reclaiming the rotten corpses of beasts who have done their time. Life is but a fleeting illusion, shrouded in malice and hatred and needs and wants of egoistic beings. Is she consoling you because she's sad, or because she believes that to be the right thing to do? Is she aiming to please the sensei, or to help you? I'm sorry, he muttered. I should have. Sakura cringed and shook her head. Naruto, you did what you could. Had it been me or Sai, we wouldn't have survived. It feels wrong, Naruto said then, shaking his head. She had friends, family, love, and happiness, she had everything and, it was taken away, like that, for no reason. And I remained behind. Why? Survivor's guilt is unneeded in you, dickless, Sai quipped in the next instant. You were trained better. You were stronger. You survived. It wasn't your fault. I shouldn't have left her there alone, he retorted. I should have known something was strange. And what then? You would have died sooner. Sai's reply was monotone, without even a glimpse of heat, as if he was just stating the obvious. This death happened. You can do nothing to change this fact. You can only live on. But Naruto, Sakura muttered then. It's all right, she said, putting her left hand on his shoulder. You couldn't do anything to help. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't do anything, the Cuabai sing-sung. You really couldn't. After all, you had no idea what was going to happen, did you? Nobody told you of the missing nins, nobody told you of who was a spy and who wasn't, and most importantly, nobody tried to warn you. Truly, you couldn't do anything at all. Yes, it was. He snapped back. It was my fault, all my fault. Shut it, Shikamaru's voice cut in from in front of them. His dark eyes seemed to bore into his own cerulean ones as the Nara spoke then. Ino was a friend of ours since we were kids, but this wasn't your fault. She was bossy, always expecting to be right and petulant, but this wasn't your fault, she didn't train. Hell, we didn't train. I watched you fight the bandits, and I'm sure that clan child or not, you'd win against any of us. So if you had no hope of surviving, what makes you think Ino had? You were just lucky. He sniffed a moment, turning his blinking gaze back forward. And Ino wasn't. That's all there is. Chuji just kept on eating, albeit his frown was slightly more pronounced as it returned to stare forward. He wouldn't be able to defeat me, Sasuke said calmly. I would have saved the civilians and the girl. Shut it, Uchiha, Kiba snarled. I swear if you say another word I'm going to shove my fist where the sun doesn't shine. Sasuke-kun protected me from Zabuza. Naruto Baka would never have been able to do that. Ami screeched. Silence, you lot. Kakashi snapped back curtly, for once showing a heat that he wasn't commonly renowned for. One of your fellow Konoha shinobi died recently. Have some respect. The rest of the trip was spent in an uncomfortable silence, with Aoba, Kakashi, or Asuma not saying a single word. Even the medic Chiryunins seemed quiet, and the Kyuubi silently stowed away. Except for Chuji's insisting munching, only their footsteps echoed throughout the forest. The gates of Konoha were open as they returned beneath a wonderfully clear sky and a shining sun. The populace was milling about its usual business, as the three genins of Team 13 delivered their written reports to their sensei, before turning to leave. Naruto, wait! Sakura exclaimed suddenly, grabbing the boy's jacket by the back. Let's go eat somewhere together. You too, Sai. I have an errand to run, Cherry, Sai quipped in. Enjoy your date with Dickless. The raven-haired boy disappeared through the nearby alleyway, leaving the two stumped teammates behind. This isn't a date, Sakura snapped back at Naruto. He merely shrugged at that. Where should we go? He asked then. We could get some ramen, there's this place that recently opened up, she answered back quickly, gesturing towards the opposite direction as the one Sai had taken. He hesitantly nodded, and began to walk next to the girl. Wait. Sasuke's voice cut the air as they turned wary glances at the Uchiha. We're in Konoha now. Fight me. We just came back, Sakura muttered. Can't you wait until tomorrow? I'm not talking to you now. Mission's over, Naruto can decide by himself. Sasuke's retort was filled with something akin to distaste for the pink-haired Kunoichi, who looked offended at those words. Naruto just frowned. The dark-haired boy shook his head then. No. Chicken. Yes, he admitted calmly. I am. We can go, Sakura. You're just a coward. You left the girl and ran, isn't it? That's how you survived. By running away. Sasuke's words echoed as the two of them hurriedly made their way away from the last of the Uchiha. The streets just seemed to swap one with the other with frightening speed, as they entered the areas of Konoha that generally weren't available to the civilians. The streets emptied drastically, and the number of flak jackets and forehead protectors increased with every step they took. In a corner of one of the streets, a dingy-looking shop stood with a painted insignia that recited in a scaly green and mottled brown the word Hebai. Snake? He asked then. Who'd name a restaurant Snake? It's the place I talked to you about, Sakura spoke then. My parents bake the breads for their shop. They also serve ramen. You sure? As they entered, Naruto couldn't help but be attracted by a set of glass counters holding within them various assorted sweets and salty treats. It looks more like a coffee shop. The walls were a soft cerulean blue, the chairs and tables of mahogany seemed to shine as the silk tablecloths seemed to sort of give the vibe of high-class establishment. The pavement was made of marble, thick black veins running along its tiles as was the norm for certain types of the rock. It is, a voice remarked from the side of the entrance. There stood a boy with pale white skin and red eyes, his hair a light blonde that nearly seemed to be white. He was wearing a loose blue shirt and a pair of green trousers. And it's also much more. Whatever the heart desires, we strive to serve, the boy smirked at that. Table for two. Naruto fidgeted uncomfortably. This place reeked of high costs, and shinobi have discounts, the boy added then. And all prices are affordable to begin with. We also take checks, and as long as you leave us your shinobi ID, we can directly take the money from your account. He seemed to still for a second, turning thoughtful. We also guarantee confidentiality, especially with couples. We're not a couple. Sakura screeched. We're just back from a mission. Oh, the boy nodded. Want a quiet corner anyway? He pointed to one of the room's corners, away from the entrance and in the lampshade. There's also no ban on shinobi drinking, so if you want a stiff drink. No thanks, Sakura blurted out as she followed the man towards the table. Naruto followed hesitantly. He hadn't had the reflex to use the henge, but then again the shop had just recently opened, and his hair was black now. There was no way they'd recognize him, right? He should have gone to talk with Danzo, but as it was he needed time to get his thoughts back. This seemed like a pretty normal place, with pretty normal stuff and pretty normal everything. It didn't even look as if he had just seen Ino's corpse days before. If somebody looked at him, they wouldn't see the boy who had nearly died against enemy shinobi, would they? He had fresh clothes, he was slightly sweaty and probably smelled a bit, but nobody seemed to care. One of the shinobi sitting further away from the entrance was actually holding his right swollen cheek with a bleeding lip. He supposed that downtime for shinobi was whenever they could, never mind showers or personal health. Ah. If it isn't Harino-san, an older voice piped in from their side, as a portly-looking man with a pair of mustaches walked over. I just talked with your parents this morning, they always strive to provide me the best in baked goods, you know. They were slightly heartbroken with worry at you not being back yet, but I suppose I can hardly fault you, such a nice-looking man, he chuckled while winking at Naruto, who was actually surprised at such warmth in the man's voice. Sakura sputtered back a hasty, "It's not what it looks like," but the portly man just laughed again. Well. Don't you worry about it. I won't be telling your parents you've been here with a boy, he winked, this time towards Sakura. So, ready to order? Kuro-san, Sakura mumbled. It's really not what it looks like. Of course, Kuro remarked with a knowing nod. Of course. Ramen? Naruto hesitantly asked. Which type? Kuro queried back. Ah, pork, Naruto sheepishly admitted. I'll have a salad, Sakura said then, before suddenly biting her lower lip and adding. And Anko dumplings. And Mitsu as dessert as always. Kuro added then with a knowing look. Why yeah, Sakura fidgeted as she admitted that. Good. He then chuckled once more good-naturedly, before adding. What about drinks then? Water, soft drinks, energy drinks, coffee. You'd let someone drink coffee with ramen? Naruto couldn't help but blurt out that question, as the man simply laughed once more before replying. Of course. Whatever the client desires, whatever the heart wishes for, we are here to try and give it through food. If someone wishes to drink coffee while eating ramen, it's their choice, not ours to make. I'll have water, Naruto hastily said. Me too, Sakura quipped in. Then have a pleasant wait. Kuro left a moment later, and as an embarrassing silence descended, only the soft sounds of people talking around them was left. Normality is hiding all that is evil and undefeatable behind a carpet of wistful ignorance, the Kyuubi spoke again, his voice soft and amused. Killers and victims, all eat, drink and live their lives with the same verve and cadence as innocents, don't you know? To lie and put up a mask of mock normality is what humans are all about around others. The woman who laughs to the tasteless joke of the boyfriend, the man who smiles and nods to the girl he likes even if she's as plain as a plank board, the desire to rip the skull out of the person we hate which is suppressed behind half-assed smiles. Naruto? Are you all right? He widened his eyes and shook his head quickly, trying to clear his thoughts. Why yeah, sorry Sakura, it's just, Ino died and we're here. Sakura herself bit her lower lip a moment, before crossing her arms over her chest. Ino was my first friend, she whispered with a small croak. I still can't imagine she's really dead. I think she's going to pop out from around the corner any moment now, yelling how she just wanted to play an act for Sasuke-kun or how she's going to wipe the ground out of me for being a big forehead or something like that. The pink-haired girl wistfully smiled. We used to do a lot of things together, her breath hitched, her shoulders began to tremble. She was the first one to tell me my forehead wasn't ugly. I didn't believe her but I went along. She was everything I wanted to be, sure of herself, prideful, always with a smile and headstrong. Bitterly, she added. And then she had to ruin our friendship and fall in love with Sasuke-kun. Sakura's eyes looked down to the surface of the table, before whispering out. I know you didn't run away, Naruto. You're not like that, she shook her head. You'd have saved her if you had stood a chance. Yet I'm here thinking what would have happened, hadn't I gone and looked for Sai, her voice grew fearful. What if I hadn't accepted? What if I had simply gone with Ino to wash the dishes? Would I have survived against them? And I can't answer that with a yes, Naruto. I can't because I know I wouldn't have lasted. The wound on your side, that would have killed anyone. Had I been there, had I not accepted, I would have been dead together with Ino. She shuddered. I don't want to admit it. A shinobi must never show their tears. A shinobi must never show their fears. A shinobi must rule in their emotions. A shinobi must not show any weakness. A shinobi must not fear death, but accept it. She grimly stated each sentence with mechanic precision, before adding, I'm not fit to be a shinobi. I became one to follow Ino and Sasuke-kun, me the civilian with pink hair. Really, where the hell do you see pink as a good enough color to hide? And I never trained seriously, my stamina is pitiful still and there's really nothing I can seem to do to become stronger. I'm weak, ignorant, and most of the time at the academy I just screeched like some sort of harpy. Her eyes shone with tears now, as she looked back up at Naruto. I know I'm going to be the next to die, Naruto, and I'm scared. He clenched his own fists, his eyes narrowing on the trembling girl in front of him before he whispered back. No, you won't. Chains and shackles made of bonds shall twist your path to a new one, the Kyuubi whispered. Aren't you planning on defecting? Where does Sakura fit in this? Do you think they'll let you and her go? Do you think you'll even manage to leave? Do not make promises you cannot keep, Naruto, they will only end in tragedy and tears. I won't permit it, he hissed out once more. N.A. Naruto. You're not going to die on the next mission, Sakura. You're not going to die on the following one too or the one after that again. You'll become strong with time and training, and and I will protect you until you'll be able to protect us in turn. We'll speak to Aoba-sensei and ask for more training. We'll scurry the library for techniques available to us genins, we'll learn about traps and whatnot. We'll do everything we can to survive. I promise you this, it won't happen again. Sakura just looked at him for a moment more, before a small smile stood etched on her face then. She cocked her head to the side as her eyes closed, while a smile blossomed on her lips. She stopped trembling, as her hands came down on her sides at the same time as she spoke. Thank you, Naruto-kun. And then lunch passed by in a comfortable, for once, silence. It was late at night, when in the Sarutobi compound 4 figures stood still in the darkness. All of the shinobi wore masks, but the stench of nicotine from one, the tuft of silver hair from another and the prim and mechanical pose of the third gave little doubt on the real identity of the men. The fourth one was dressed in the white robes of the Hokage, and the mask he wore was made of simple porcelain, colored a ghastly white. You knew this would happen, the gruff voice of Asuma was accusing, rather than neutral. You knew Yagura would strike against the civilians. The attack was too organized, the missing nin too prepared. It could have been any of us, Asuma, Kakashi spoke next gravely. It could have been Ami, or Sakura. It should have been Sakura. We drew the lot. She swapped with Naruto, and we had no choice. They nearly killed the Jinchuriki too, he retorted. For all purposes, they were ready to kill him. It should have been a civilian's death, Sarutobi spoke calmly. To hush it down quickly and quietly, try and pry out more from Kiri. Inoichi has unfortunately yet to come around, but when he does I hope he will not take out his anger against Naruto. It never was about helping the people, was it? Aoba asked then carefully. It was about sending probes to Kiri territory. See if there were any refugees with bloodlines among the border that might have slipped in with the hurricanes. Bloodlines will always be accepted into Konoha, Hiruzen remarked. Beneath the leaves, all are equal. But some are more equal than others, isn't that right, father? Asuma bitterly retorted. You told me to pass the team, that they would not be trained by me but by their clans. You told me everything would take care of itself and that tradition was all the clans had to see. This tradition destroyed my team and killed one of my genins. Fault the clans, not me, Hiruzen answered back with ease. They should have trained their children more, like I did with you. And I ran away for years after that, Asuma snapped back. Maybe, but you were strong enough to enter the daimyo's court, weren't you? And you are here, still alive and bickering against my ways. That is something not many other clan leaders can attest. Ino was an only child. Aoba asked carefully. It is sad, isn't it? The idea of one and a spare isn't something many clans do anymore. The Uchiha did, with Itachi and Sasuke, but I do not know about the others. The spare is usually kept hidden, to appear out at a moment's notice in case he or she is needed. Normally the spare is civilian, rather than shinobi. Kakashi drew out a long breath, before muttering. I think Naruto and Yakushi have a previous history of sorts. The silver-haired Jounin was soon startled by the amount of concern that the Hokage size showed him. Explain. He recoiled from him when the Chunin came close to heal him. Any reason? Aoba. He looked terrified, but there was nothing of the sort. I too checked, all the medical records were fine and Yakushi wasn't even his attending physician. They never met before. Aoba's face turned thoughtful. It might be a similarity with someone else though. The same color of hair is common enough, and Mizuki's hair is pale white too, right? More of a cerulean light, Asuma scoffed. Didn't know you had a discerning ability for colors, Kakashi quipped. Kurane insists there is a difference between crimson red and petunia red. As fascinating as this is, Hiruzen retorted. We have other things to concern us with. I plan on Team 13 taking the silent graduation, anyone against it? There was silence, as everyone thought it over. If I may, Aoba spoke after a while. Why not have them go through the first part of the examination, and then tell them to give up before the main event? It would display the required mindset of following the leader, even against personal gain. Even better, speak to each of them privately before the start of the second. Kakashi's eyes suddenly lit up. Tell each of them that the third is optional like the second, and have them go through the entire second test without delivering the information to one another. Shinobi need secrecy after all. And what if instead they share the information? Telling one not to tell the others is moot if all speak to one another, Asuma sighed. I'd tell them all and let it be easy. The kids earned it. Nothing is earned without sweat, Hiruzen snapped. We'll go with Kakashi's suggestion. Furthermore, the punishment for revealing the information to the others will be made to be the equivalent of an S-rank secret. They need to surrender in order to let the clan children or the foreign teams pass. They will also have a secondary objective of taking out foreign shinobi and teams not of our liking. That would be enough. Sai and Naruto? Maybe, but Sakura's. Aoba's words were cut short by the Hokage. Then train her more. Concentrate on her exclusively. If she's a weak link, then batter her up with steel until she becomes something strong. Sai and Naruto are both receiving private training on the side with yours. Give something more to the girl, Aoba. She's got excellent control. I was planning on medic nin and genjut. Not enough, Hiruzen snapped. That can begin when she's a Chunin, till then what else does she have? She was first in theory, wasn't she? Stress her and see her point of breakage. Bring her to the torture and interrogation department, get her to learn the interrogation methods. She's a civilian, but that doesn't mean she can't be molded into a kunoichi. TNI clearance will be difficult to acquire. Aoba's words died in his mouth as the Sandame's mouth twitched into the beginning of a smile. I said to bring her there and get her to learn. Osmosis training, Aoba. Fight with the monkeys to become a monkey. Asuma's question seemed directed at the Sandame, who merely chuckled before nodding. Why though? In our world, information is power. Truthful information is priceless and false information is condemning. Learning how to get the truth out of an enemy is possibly the hardest thing, and with Yamanaka Ino's death. You plan on placing her on a clan-only spot in the future. Kakashi's lone eye narrowed dangerously. This never was about killing a civilian to make the point to the other generations. This was about killing a clan children, from the very beginning it. Silence, hey take, the Sandame's voice was positively cruel in that instant. So what if a position entitled to a Yamanaka clan member is now going to be left to ballot? So what if a civilian might have a better shot at it? It is just a random event and it holds no importance. It could have happened to any other clan children on the mission. The chances were far higher for one of them than for a civilian. The information was purposefully leaked to the Kiryumbus. They were expecting me, father. Asuma's voice was croaked now. They were expecting bloodlines. Maybe so, Hiruzen admitted. But I did not leak anything. I knew of someone who would do so in my place, in order to make certain lessons stick. And you let him? There was disbelief in Asuma's voice, his eyes slightly bulged out. The Yamanaka clan has been an ally of the Sarutobi for decades, father. Why? You cannot have power in multiple heads, Asuma, Hiruzen snapped back. You can have secrets against the enemy, you can have secrets among your friends, but you cannot have secrets among your comrades. There is no such thing as a council of clan heads, but that doesn't mean something similar cannot or will not exist given enough time. Is that all? Is that really the only reason? You speak as if I planned this, Asuma, the Sandaime spoke back. You know what the true skill of a politician is? It is to find the way to profit in any situation, no matter where or when the opportunity presents itself. Had the attack been successful against Sakura Harino, I would have spoken with Naruto about the true culprit. Had it been successful on another civilian, I would have stressed the need for the academy to increase their physical training, never mind the risks for civilian ninjas to outperform clan children. Had it taken another clan child? It would have been the same as now. Sasuke was given to Kakashi for the sole purpose of keeping him protected, he wouldn't have died. This is why I went to the daimyo's court, father, Asuma snapped back. Everything with you is either a way to earn something or a mean to an end. You can't truly be that naive still, Asuma. The Sandaime retorted hotly. Haven't you come back because you had grown disillusioned with the politics of the capital? Half of the guardians rebelled against the daimyo for a reason, didn't they? Asuma remained quiet afterwards. Calmly, the Sandaime turned his gaze to the other two. Aoba, you have your orders. Kakashi, find anything on Yakushi that we can use to get him out of Konoha, similar or not. Naruto is the Jinhiriki of the Kyuubi, and if he snaps, I need not tell you what will happen then, do I? Yes, Hokage-sama. A flurry of leaves later and only Asuma remained in the room with his father. Why must you always make things this difficult, son? Why are you making this sound easy? Asuma's right fist slammed against the nearby wall. You've changed since mother's death. No, Hiruzen shook his head wistfully. Biwako was many things, but not the reason. I never changed, Asuma. You just got better at seeing through the hidden beneath of the underneath. Why trust Aoba? Asuma asked then cautiously. I understand Kakashi, but Aoba. He is a shinobi from a civilian family, Hiruzen began carefully. He, more than anyone else, can relate to what is happening. Konoha was birthed from the union of clans, but to dismiss the civilians only because they do not share the blood? Many of the Inyazuka techniques can be taught to outsiders, the Yamanaka's special ability is but a skill learned in youth. The jujutsus might be impossible to subconsciously use, but the tenketsu points in a body rarely move, and anyone can learn to mold chakra in their fingertips or have keen enough eyes to see an enemy Chiryunin go through the hand signs for a technique. We make our bloodlines resemble myths of might and power, but the moment we start believing that ourselves, that is the moment we lose. We don't have a bloodline. Exactly. The problem with classes of citizens is exactly that. What makes you think that tomorrow the requirement to be from a shinobi clan will simply be the surname? What if only bloodlines were to be required? What if only special skills? Asuma, we of the Sarutobi clan summon monkeys, but the true strength lies not in them, but in our ability to adapt. Humans are not inherently stronger than beasts, but we learned to circumvent that with tools, didn't we? The sage of the six paths circumvented war with the use of chakra, and defeated the demon, the Juabi, with said power. Do not forget that to adapt is to survive, in life and on the battlefield. So, who will I get as a replacement? Asuma asked slowly. A certain Merebashi, Hiruzen smirked. Kasuke? Kasuke Merebashi. Asuma whispered, wincing, and swallowing a lump of nervousness in his throat. Yes, the eternal genin himself, Hiruzen acquiesced. It will be for the best. He'll help both Shikamaru and Chuji to cope with their loss, and even if he decides to avoid graduation, he'll be an asset during the previous tasks. Asuma clenched his right fist. He knew there was something else about this settlement. He knew there had to be a reason for this. Was it a test of his teaching skills? Was this some sort of sadistic way of making him a clown of the entire Konoha? The son of the Hokage teaching the strongest genin, because he clearly needs genin who can fend off for themselves and do not risk dying on his watch. He turned to leave, only for the final words of the Sandaime to strike home. Don't slack off now, Asuma. Dark times are coming, the darkness is moving, and when it does come, I hope Kami will still be able to put up a good fight. To those words, he had nothing to answer back. And so he left. In silence. Chapter 15, The Tortures of Life. Life is fleeting. 3 words were all Danzo said, as Naruto finished recounting his tale to the old shinobi. You cannot expect it to last. He flinched. He awkwardly nodded. He stared once more. Why live, then? He whispered back with a croaked voice. Because we have a purpose, Danzo admitted with a small nod. To have a family, to have a good book to read, to have friends, small things, little things, and we are shinobi because we wish to protect others who have our dreams, who have bonds. We wish to protect Konoha because it is in part our duty and in part our purpose. He clenched his right fist. But they're ignorant of our sacrifice. Danzo's words slapped at Naruto, who stared wide-eyed at the shinobi. They believe shinobi are just over-glorified tools of war. They believe life is made of peace, and that the only way out of a situation is through talk. Do you know what happens when you extend the laurel of peace? Think, what would an enemy do when you replace the kunao in your hand for a branch of olive? They'd attack, Naruto replied, thinking of the worst-case scenario he could muster. It would be a way to retaliate before the end. Exactly, Danzo acquiesced. The Nidaime Hokage was attacked and grievously wounded after Kumigakure's peace talks. Again, the following talks nearly managed in kidnapping the Hyuga heiress. Again and again Konoha offered peace and received back thin-veiled insults and menaces. Do you know that Konoha is dying? The age of entrance in the academy was 4. Instead of pampering shinobi, however, results were asked immediately. By the age of 12, a shinobi was a Chunin already bloodied or a corpse, Danzo said. Yet they were ready for the biggest fights. You could ask any child your age to kill, and they would hesitate before doing so. Isn't that right though? Naruto asked. It isn't, Danzo shook his head slowly. Once, Jounin-sensei brought their students on C ranks to deal with bandits, and that day the genins returned with blood on their hands and truth etched in their hearts. Shinobi do not need to always kill, but they must never hesitate when the order is given. I already killed, he whispered. Does that make me ready? I can say with little doubt that you are a shinobi, Naruto. Maybe not the strongest, maybe not the fastest or the most cunning, but you are a genin. You are at the very least worthy of the rank. Naruto smiled. It was awkward at first, but then it bloomed as he realized that Danzo was actually praising him, and without half-minced words or whatever else he usually said. He was actually being considered shinobi material. He was actually good at what he did. It felt nice. I want to train more, Naruto said then. I want to become stronger and stronger, he added with a hopeful tone. So that I can protect the people precious to me. Danzo coughed slightly, before turning his single eye on him. People eventually die, he remarked. You should value ideals more than individuals. The human betrays. The human lies. The human, generally cannot be trusted. Ideals instead can. A strong Konoha, a strong village that can birth strong and prepared shinobis, that is my dream. That is what I strive for. You might create a bond with a few people, Naruto, but when those bonds will break inevitably, they always do, you will be wounded far worse than anything else the enemy could have done. Civilians create bonds. Shinobi are tasked with breaking them most of the time. Trust in the bigger picture, however, and deaths will only be temporary rollbacks. Naruto frowned. You will understand eventually, Danzo admitted. For the moment, let us return to training, all right. He nodded quickly. Danzo's walking stick lifted from the ground as he pointed it against him. The old shinobi flexed his muscles slightly, the chakra flowing through his body to his feet. The next instant speed was all that Naruto could think of as the tip slammed into his stomach, making bile rise to his throat. Perforated stomach. Death by blood loss. He rolled to the side, avoiding the second deft strike that had come far slowly than normal. He skittered backwards, just in time to dodge a horizontal swipe that would have probably cut his face in half, had it been a sword in Danzo's hand. Attrition can be offset by chakra, Danzo remarked. One can easily gain attrition against smooth or wet surfaces, just as it can be lost. No attrition when gliding more speed, attrition when on a wet surface means the same. Carefully controlled displacement of attrition means moving without making noise. Danzo's speed increased just as an unnatural silence filled the air around them. Naruto's eyes widened slightly as the tip of the old shinobi's walking cane settled inches away from his right eye. Dead. The cane was brought back down on the ground as the wind started once more to blow around them. Silence is both the shroud of the shinobi and its unnerving curse, Danzo spoke. To fight in silence, without words, that increases tension. To talk, to speak, or to interact breaks the tension. To act upon the tension, to let the other snap first, that is what we will be working on together with attrition managing. Naruto just nodded. Danzo-sensei always taught more than one thing at the same time. He wondered, as he began to silently concentrate on the feeling of his chakra, what the others were doing. Sakura Haruno was agonizing on the ground. Her sensei had apparently decided she was to become the punching sack of the team. Sai had been merciful, but their sensei hadn't. The spar with Sai had been a cakewalk even if she had lost it compared to what her sensei had done. She could feel her joints flare in pain even as she just barely thought about moving. Her right ankle had been dislocated, and even putting a small amount of weight on it made her cry out in pain. Her vision was slightly obscured, but she could make out her sensei talking to Sai about something. She couldn't hear pretty well. Her head had been banged up against a tree bark, and that somehow made her believe she was having a concussion ongoing. Hospital. She inwardly sighed. They were going to bring her to the hospital. That was good. She really just needed a nice nap after all of this. Useless, she flinched. She had heard the word but she couldn't place who had said that. Had it been Sai or their sensei? She tried to stand up, at least enough to find out. She was grabbed by a pair of strong hands a second later, and lifted up. She saw dark raven hair and a look of apathy on Sai's face, as the boy carried her towards the hospital. Sai. She mumbled, her consciousness fading. There was no reply, but she pressed on. I'll do better. Her sight finally clouded itself completely, as she embraced darkness. She believed Sai had actually replied, but she hadn't heard unfortunately. Maybe she'd ask him the next time. Definitively. She wasn't going to stop. So what if she ended up battered and bruised in the hospital? Sensei had just stepped up with the training to make sure Ino's death wouldn't be repeated with another one of his students. It had to be that. There just wasn't a reason for Aoba-sensei to act cruelly with her during training otherwise. Really? It had to be. At the same time, Team 7 was being wildly flung around through the entire training ground. Viciousness didn't even begin to describe what their sensei was doing, as Ami had literally broken and begun to cry like a fountain a moment later. Kiba was feeling soreness everywhere, but he could still stand. Sasuke on the other hand. He had been completely crushed. The Uchiha had its limbs twisted and broken, his eyes snapped shut because of sand and his breathing irregular. He didn't doubt for a second who was the strongest, and his feeling of weakness was second only to the burning fire of hate he was starting to feel for his sensei. Yet it didn't matter, because he couldn't move and the Inyazuka was all that stood between him and their sensei. He was pathetic, really. Well, Kakashi drawled out as he appeared straight behind Kiba. What have we learned today? With the back of his hand, he slammed the Inyazuka against the nearby tree, before sighing and taking out his Ika teacher violence, Forbidden Edition. Kakashi muttered after a moment, his only visible eye moving to the collapsed genins who were twitching in heaps of broken bones on the ground. I think I might have gone overboard a little bit. He sighed. Well, I can't expect anything more for today I suppose. He flexed his fingers, conjuring two cage buns hins. Gesturing at the fallen twitching bodies, he turned and left. He was pretty sure they'd be treated in the hospital, and if he had done it well enough, then they wouldn't have to participate in the Churyunin exams. There really was no need to risk the 3 genins with the upcoming tests. Controlled promotion or not, some things still were bound to happen anyway. Broken bones would give them time to think furthermore, and if worse came to worse and they still managed to heal enough to enter, he'd make sure they wouldn't, even if he had to place Ami under a genjutsu. Asuma Sarutobi was taking a deep breath of nicotine from his overly strong cigar, when he found himself accosted by Inoichi. The Yamanaka clan leader said nothing, only stared dumbly ahead at the marble tombstone that held the names of the deceased of the clans Yamanaka, Nara, and Akimichi. The most recent name etched on it was clearly noticeable, as was the amount of flowers and lit incense that surrounded it. Ino Yamanaka. She was always smiling, Inoichi whispered. She was so happy when she became a kunoichi. I entrusted her safety to you, Asuma. He looked at him, but there was no accusation in his voice, no heat in his tone. She was the apple of my eye, always, always. Inoichi, you know I would have never. I know, the Yamanaka clan leader remarked. I know, I heard she was separated from the rest of the group. I heard the enemies were strong, Jounin and Chiryunin level. I know there was nothing she could have done, no matter what, but still. His breath hitched. Why her? He muttered. Why not someone else? Asuma said nothing. The wind gently picked up. Inoichi said slowly. If I find out what really happened, the Yamanaka clan head stared at Asuma slowly. I will have my revenge. The man turned and left then, leaving behind the bearded Jounin to take yet one more breath of smoke. He looked up, towards the sky, and then sighed. It took 2 days of time to arrange for the procedure to go through. In those 2 days, Aoba remained firmly set on getting as much training as possible into Sakura, disregarding both Naruto and Sai, who remained eerily perplexed. By the start of the 3rd day, there was no doubt that something was going on. Their Jounin-sensei was acting too strangely from the norm. I'm going to die, Sakura muttered with exhaustion filling her voice. I can't go on like this. She coughed. Fight on, Cherry, Sai quipped. Your punches have gotten better, he slowly added. Sakura frowned for a moment, before a small smile spread on her face. Fine. Shan narrow. Her right fist ended up blocked by Sai's left one, who quickly pushed his body to the side of Sakura, slammed his other hand down on the girl's ankle and grabbed at it, before pulling her off balance and then pressing the advantage, an elbow straight to the girl's side. From negative to 0, Sai finalized calmly. It is an improvement. Sakura growled slightly, before another fit of racking coughs made her stop. Ah, she mumbled. It was in that moment that Aoba-sensei appeared in front of the 2 genin. We're going to the torture and interrogation department, his voice was tight and silent. Sakura raised an eyebrow in perplexity, but Sai remained quiet. The walk towards the secret department of Konoha was eerily shrouded in tension. Aoba-sensei did not speak or make idle talk, and if anything the way he moved was to say it in one word: stiff. It was as if he was carrying some sort of weight on his conscience. They entered through the doors and passed through the corridors that deeply rooted themselves within the monument of Konoha, until they suddenly were gestured to stop before a door. Sai, wait here, Aoba remarked quietly, signaling Sakura to walk with him through the door. Sai complied, and as the door slowly opened and then closed behind them, Sakura watched as inside the room, strapped to a chair and with a heavy dark cloth bound to his eyes, as well as earplugs and a cloth gag to prevent him from speaking, stood a chest-naked Naruto. He was breathing coarsely, his chest expanding and contracting. Torture instruments stood near the corner of the room, with more being held by wicked-looking hooks. A few of the instruments still sported fleshy bits of skin and torn muscle, and the lurching feeling of sickness that Sakura was feeling just intensified. Well then, Aoba remarked coolly. It took a while, but you will be leading the interrogation of shinobi number 012607. He has been found trying to leave Konoha with important information. He planned on settling in with Kirigakure. It was discovered he actually helped in the slaughtering of the civilians and the death of... That's a lie, Sakura whispered, interrupting Aoba. You're lying. Her breath hitched. He can't have. Do not interrupt, Aoba hissed back. He has been given earplugs, a blindfold and a gag, so he will not know who is interrogating him. He has currently been held in sensory isolation for 4 hours. Sakura's own heartbeat was now erratic, to say the least. He has confessed to the crimes, but not to who was to be his handler within Konoha. She shook her head, tears menacing to fall from her eyes. Naruto would never have done something like that. He'd never. You are hereby tasked with acquiring that information, without killing the subject. It is a C-ranked mission. We will value yours and Sai's own integrity to the ranks of Konohagakure after this, so you would do better starting to convince us you actually are loyal to the Leaf. Aoba turned to leave. Try not to betray my expectations, Sakura. One rogue student to execute is hard enough. And then the door closed behind him. Sakura clenched her fists. It couldn't be true. There was no way it was true. Naruto would never. Maybe it wasn't Naruto? Maybe this was a genjutsu. Kai. She tried, hard. Nothing happened. Naruto still remained there, strapped to the chair. Kai. She exclaimed, her voice cracking. Kai. Kai. Sob Kai. Tears began to slowly fall down her cheeks. Had Naruto really done that? Had he killed Ino? He couldn't have, could he? But it was Naruto sitting there, wasn't he? She moved to remove the mouth gag. Naruto's body flinched as she removed the piece of cloth. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. He whispered coarsely. Sakura bit her lower lip, before removing his earplugs and his blindfold. Naruto looked at her for a moment, eye wide, and then returned coldly to state. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. And Naruto, Sakura whispered. It's me, Sakura, she said. Please, tell me it isn't true, she pleaded. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. Naruto? They said you killed Ino. They said you wanted to leave for Kirigakure. Please, tell me it isn't true. Sakura whispered. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. Naruto's eyes unfocused on her, and rather concentrated on looking around. Was he looking for a way out? She clenched her right fist. We went to eat at Hebai just 3 or 4 days ago, she added. You had ramen of all things, she shook her head. You told me you didn't do it. You were so sorry about it that it made my heart clench. Please, tell me it wasn't you. Naruto just coolly looked at her with a face of frozen ice, before whispering back. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. She closed her eyes and shook her head. I can't do this, she whispered. Please, I know you're innocent. Just say something. Tell me. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 1260. Sakura slammed her right fist against Naruto's left cheek. I don't want your Shinobi ID. Naruto. She screeched at him. Her hands grabbed his shoulders. Tell me the truth. Did you kill Ino? He spat out a small drop of blood from his mouth, but kept on looking at her with firmness. Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi IDO 12607. The second fist slammed on his right cheek. The third broke his nose. Sakura was a crying heap by the time the fifth fist connected with the boy's temple. Tell me the truth. Did you kill Ino? You hit like a girl, Naruto muttered. I am a girl, you stupid jerk. She slapped him after that, tears now freely falling from her cheeks. Why did you do that? Why would you go to Kiri? Naruto, Uzumaki, sh. Sakura grabbed the first instrument on the table. It was a surgical blade. She moved it close to the boy's right cerulean eye while biting her lips as her trembling hand refused to still itself. I'm taking your eye, Naruto. Please, answer me. Please tell me it's a lie and that you're innocent. Please, I don't want to. I don't want to take away your eye. Please don't force me, please. She pleaded him as she breathed slowly, the tip of the blade near his eye. This had to be a test. This had to be a lie. They'd stop her before. They wouldn't let her take away Naruto's eyes. Aoba would come in and tell her it was a lie. There simply was no way they'd let her do this, right? Naruto Uzumaki, Shinarg H. And Naruto screamed as she plunged the surgical blade into his left eye socket. He screamed as blood came out and she hastily removed the blade together with the eyeball. He screamed and he didn't stop screaming even as he shut the eyelid close and blood kept on falling. She held the surgical blade in her right hand and as her breathing hitched. Nobody came to stop her. There was no one. There was no test. It was reality. This was real. Naruto was a traitor. This was real. This was real. This was real. This was real. You killed Ino, she whispered. You killed her, you monster, you sick freak, you killed her. She screamed at him. Say it. Tell me who else knew. Tell me who your handler in Konoha is. Tell me or I'll take your other eye. Tell me now. Her shoulders moved up and down in shock and silent unbelieving laughter. Her face was a mixture of sorrow, disbelief and soundless agony. Tell me, she whispered once more. Her left hand grabbed blindly another instrument, a pair of pliers. Or I'll take out your teeth one by one. She moved the pliers to the boy's mouth. Tell me the truth, Naruto. Nar. A tooth was forcefully plucked out. You killed Ino, she whispered. I'm not going to forgive you for this, she added. She was my friend. And you killed her. You're a worthless bastard. You don't deserve to have friends. You don't deserve to have anyone at all. She grabbed a poker, letting the pliers fall. She slammed it into his right hand, hearing the satisfying crunch of broken bones as the sharp metal pierced through the skin and passed straight through. Tell me who your handler is. She screamed at him, twisting the poker into his hand. I don't want to hurt you, Naruto, but... Sakura was about to grab another instrument to saw, of all things when Naruto croaked out with a whispered voice. I'm sorry, tears were in his eyes. I can't cough do this, he choked slightly. It was then that Sakura's eyes widened as she realized just what she had been doing till then. She brought both hands to her mouth and turned green, before ending up moving her head to the side and retching on the floor. She heaved until her breathing grew ragged and her mouth tasted of rancid vomit. Sweat fell down from her forehead as she brought her hands to move her hair back behind her shoulders. Please Naruto, she whimpered. Tell me the truth. I can't do this. I don't want to hurt you. Naruto just looked at her with his remaining eye, the cerulean orb filled with tears. They looked at each other for a moment more, before the door of the room rattled and was swung aside as fast as it could be. Aoba dashed in the room in a flash, grabbing Sakura's wrists and slamming her on the ground before another masked shinobi moved to where Naruto was. It was barely a moment of time, but she just seemed to lose her bearings for that instant. When she regained them, she was still on the floor, but this time she was in the same room as Inoichi Yamanaka. Sakura? Take a deep breath, would you? Ino's father said so with his hands in the familiar form for the Yamanaka's technique, and when her eyes widened for a fraction, the name of Jutsu was already out of the man's lips. It lasted less than a second. Inoichi took a deep breath, and then nodded to her sensei who released her a second later. She's clear. What's going on? She screamed, trying her best to hurriedly stand up, moving backwards and getting her back against the wall. Sensei. Aoba looked at her with a frown, before nodding back to Inoichi. I'll take it from here, Yamanaka-san. All right, Inoichi turned and left without another word. Sakura, you should sit, Aoba whispered as he gestured for the chair. Now that Sakura could take in her surroundings, she realized she was in an interrogation room, one with 2 chairs and a desk in between, a glass panel standing on one side of the wall. I'm fine here, sensei, she replied calmly. Her eyes darted to the door and then the glass panel. What's going on? Sakura, I left you to spar with Sai and went to get Naruto from his sensei, right? He asked her. She nodded slowly. When I reached his sensei, I was told he had already left with me, Aoba remarked. She frowned, suddenly understanding where this was going and paling drastically. I returned back, but by then you and Sai were no longer there. She collapsed on the ground, looking at her hands in shock. I thought something was wrong, and went towards the gates of Konoha. I thought that, if an infiltrator was present and using my face, he'd try and leave with my team. I had planned on getting you all for a mission just barely in the outskirts of Konoha. I thought the man would make a move knowing that, but this time the looking underneath the underneath actually brought me to a dead end. He breathed slowly. I warned the gate guards and then hurried to the hokage. The moment I found out I had checked in with the torture and interrogation department, I hurried there together with an Umbu team. Okami, Sakura mouthed. God. That's when we found you like that. Sakura remained silent for a moment. Her eyes locked with her hands as she flexed her fingers, opening and closing her palms, as if taking interest of her wrist veins. I tortured Naruto, she whispered. Why? Why wouldn't he tell me he was innocent? She nearly choked as those words left. Why would he keep on saying that? We can assume that whoever it was, told him it was a test on pain tolerance. It's normally a compulsive test for becoming Jounin, but Chiryunins aren't obliged to take it. He thought it was a test. He probably kept on repeating his shinobi ID, right? She just looked at her sensei for a moment, before the memory of what she had done returned to her. She shuddered and hugged herself tightly, before nodding numbly. I should have known, she whimpered. I should have stopped. It should have been a test. I should have stopped. You couldn't know, Sakura, Aoba remarked soothingly. In your eyes, I had given you an order, and Naruto is my teammate. She screamed back at him, tears in the corner of her eyes. I was supposed to know he'd never do that. I was supposed to free him and get him out of there. I wasn't supposed to torture him or believe you over him. She breathed in angrily. Where is he? She asked. Aoba remained quiet for a second, before replying calmly. Sakura, you were ordered by me to torture him. You told me I had to. I just didn't have to kill him, but everything else? I did everything else. I removed one of his eyes. I broke his hand. I took out one of his teeth. I was going to saw off his ear, she whimpered. I can't. She stammered, shaking her head and bringing both hands to her ears. I can't. She pleaded with misery in her voice. Sakura, Aoba took a step forward, before kneeling next to the pink-haired genin. You have to calm down. You can't crack. If you crack, the enemy wins. You don't want them to win, right? I want to kill them, she whispered back, clenching her hands in fists as she lowered them to her sides. I want to kill them, again and again. I want to break their bones and saw off their limbs. She closed her eyes and breathed one last time, heavily. Where's Naruto? He's being treated at the hospital. A normal shinobi would have his career end, he added slowly, watching as Sakura's face turned pale. Knowing Naruto? Tomorrow he'll be up and about. She was about to smile, but then she froze. Sakura shook her head quietly a moment later. I need to change teams, she whispered. I told him things I didn't mean to, but Are you sure? Aoba asked calmly. You should come out clear with him, her sensei remarked. If you don't, you might carry this burden forever. She bit her lower lip, before closing her eyes and shuddering visibly with all of her body. She exhaled, letting her breath out before opening her eyes again. Will he even forgive me? You can't know that unless you try, right? I'm afraid, she whispered. If he doesn't, then it's fine to change teams. No, sensei, Sakura replied. Her eyes looked into his, before adding. I'm afraid he will. The Kyuubi was lazily moving a piece on the shogi board. His crimson eyes completely unfazed by the blonde boy who literally floating in the water on the other side of his cage. It was as if he didn't care at all by the non-responsiveness of the boy. Your race will never cease to amuse me, the Kyuubi remarked. To make of torture an art, I am more merciful, I kill or I do not kill. The between was never part of my nature. Fuck off, Naruto muttered. Will I get my eyesight back? Of course you will, Kurama scoffed. I can create flesh and blood, bones and skin. You think an eye is something I cannot give back. Why is it that I'm afraid? Naruto remarked quietly. He was floating in the small amount of water of the sewer, his gaze, both of his eyes in his mind, still saw unhindered as he watched the cracked and chipped paint on the ceiling. Because your race fears pain and death, the Kyuubi pointed out. Humans fear what they cannot comprehend. So you understand it. Death is the end. Pain is the road to the end. What else is there to say? What else is there to understand? To suffer is to walk the road of life towards the road of the end. Nothing more. He retorted. Then why suffer to begin with? Why not simply die and not feel the pain? The Kyuubi remained quiet. To live without pain would make life itself meaningless. You cannot understand true happiness without suffering first. The mere act of waking up a morning in a bed is nothing more than something casual, unless you have spent years sleeping on jagged rocks. A second of silence elapsed. In which case, it becomes bliss. So you have to suffer to enjoy life. A life without pain yields nothing, the Kyuubi spoke. You could say that the yin and the yang exist in balance, that good is in evil and evil is in good, but then again, there is always an unbalance. Sometimes more evil is around than good, and the good that remains becomes smaller and smaller. And then you'd come around and save it. Naruto snorted. That was my purpose, the Kyuubi whispered back. His tone was somber, rather than condescending. My reason to exist. My only truth, to be the reaper of malice. And then your race took it away. Take away flight from a bird, and he will die. Take away the edge of a sword, and it will be discarded. We're both prisoners, Naruto muttered. His arms stretching as he floated lifelessly. But I can't let you destroy the people who are precious to me. Oh, the Kyuubi smiled. Naruto didn't need to look at the fox to feel the smug grin. And what about those who aren't? Would you let me out, if I swore not to kill those who you value as friends? I'd have to think about it, Naruto didn't miss a beat in replying. Hey, suddenly, Naruto stood sitting, his lower half in the water as he watched the Kyuubi from afar, in his cage. I have a question. Amuse me with it, then, the Kyuubi snorted. You read minds, right? I do not read minds. I am made of malice and hatred. I am thus made of evil thoughts. Wickedness flows through me. Thus. You didn't talk as I was tortured, he retorted. You said nothing as Sakura attacked me. Why would I? There is a difference between a thought made of malice and one of ill-guided justice. Malice is when the hatred is willed for no other reason but pain itself. To make you suffer because of your mere existence. That is malice. To torture you because you killed a friend. That is, should we call it justice? But it wasn't the truth. What matters isn't what is or is not, what matters is the intention behind the action, to do evil without reason, that is malice. So, you can't read minds. Or maybe I can, and I am only lying to you. You said that if you were to lie, I'd lose all my trust in you, he rebuffed the fox. Maybe, but then again, you listen, don't you? As long as there is an ear, there is a hope. A hope for a better tomorrow, a better future, a hope for peace. Naruto remained quiet, as he absorbed those words. What was the sage of the six paths like? He was, beyond comprehension, Kurama remarked quietly. He was a force, but not of nature. If I had to try and explain it, just like the sun is the force of life, so was the sage the force of humans. He was the embodiment of all the things humans truly could become. He was a being of compassion and strength. A being of power and nurture, the likes of which never walked the earth before and never will again. The tone was wistful. And if he were to come back, he'd probably exterminate all of your precious villages. Why? The time before him was that of the warring states of the samurais. The shinobi were born from the countryside, from the farmers who wished to protect their homes but could not fight head-on with the armored men. The chakra became their weapon, taught to them by the brightest of them all. The sage was the bright light of hope in the wicked darkness. The rampaging demons were slaughtered by his advance, the samurais forced to retreat. In the end he begged the people to let go of ideas of revenge. He asked of them to use the shinobi arts to help people, and not to kill with them. The Kyuubi chuckled. He was not heard. The fox slowly stood on its legs. They would not listen to him. The roar of the nine-tailed demon shook the very walls around Naruto. And from the war that followed, from the use of techniques, of acts so depraved the likes of which you would never even recover from, the Juobi was born. The source of malice, of hatred and death beyond any others. And when the samurais were driven in a corner, when everything was meant to end, the Juobi attacked and the sage battled him, because even then, even as he watched humans fight and kill each other, he still loved them all the same. There was a sharp evil chuckle in the Kyuubi's tone now, and he won. The fox shook his head slowly. He shouldn't have. The humans were only reaping what they had sown centuries before. This was their punishment for having infringed upon things not of their comprehension. It wasn't a massacre, but a justice-driven revenge of nature against humans. And when he split us up, when he separated the Juobi into 9 different beings, he called us Baijos. He entrusted us with tasks. He told us to steady our arms and seek peace with men. He told us to be guardians, and not judges and executioners. And the Kyuubi snorted as a bitter laugh now escaped the giant fox's lips. And as the world found peace, we believed him, we believed in our father, who couldn't be wrong. Silence slowly descended. And then he died, the fox murmured. Better yet, it added. He was killed by his own son. Kurama laughed, a high and bitter tone that made Naruto's own heart wrench. Ironic. He fought for humans, he bled and lived to help them, and he was killed by his own son. The oldest one, the one which he loved the most, the one entrusted with the power to control us, he could not accept his father's decision to name the second one heir over him. The Kyuubi shook his head. Arrogance. Pride. Hatred. Malice. Death. Blood. And thus the Uchiha and the Senju clans were born. Both renounced their surname. Both refused to follow the ways of their father. And in the end, they battled one against the other, the beast lowered itself back in his cage. And in the end, slaughter was all they did, and finally, to us they turned. We entered battle. We fought and bled. We killed. We were warped. We were twisted. Finally. The fox shuddered. Finally we were trapped. Jinhuriki were born. And then they were delivered as cattle, as offers of peace. Your peace was bought from our slavery. The Kyuubi's scream of anger rose beyond what Naruto could suffer, as both of his hands were brought to his ears. We were enslaved, so that you could live in peace. The fox laughed out loud, but this one wasn't filled with hatred, as much as bitter sadness, agony beyond what Naruto could comprehend. We were your guardians, and you made us your prisoners. His eyes narrowed. So, do you still wonder why we are feared? How can there be peace between us and your race, when your race is responsible for our state? I'm sorry, he whispered. Your excuses change nothing, the Kyuubi snorted. Your actions, on the other hand, will. The Kyuubi's eyes moved to the side of his cage, but not towards the seal, no. They moved towards another spot in the wall, one that held nothing visible. This is what you should have listened to, he barked to the empty air. This is what you refused to hear. Who's there? Naruto asked, curious. One who is no longer important, the Kyuubi snorted. Now wake up, Naruto Uzumaki. Wake up and show me what your future will be. And Naruto opened his eyes, one of the two hidden behind a thick set of bandages, as the light nearly blinded him. His right hand was in a cast, and as he watched the blurred forms moving in front of him, he couldn't help but hear a light chuckle. They say the student always tries to imitate their sensei, but did you really have to try and get wounded just like me, Naruto? And Danzo Shimura's words made Naruto form a small smile, as he watched the figure wobbling closer. I suppose, in your case, that they won't scar. I'll be up by tomorrow, sensei, he whispered back. His throat felt parched, and he felt a strange weight on his side, near his left arm. I know. They did give you a 3 weeks prognosis, but knowing you? Tomorrow is even late, Danzo was smiling, something that Naruto had seen the old man do only a few times. However, here the smile disappeared and was replaced by a frown. I am disappointed in you, Naruto. You should have realized it was a trap the moment your teammate began inflicting normally career-ending wounds on your body. Sorry. Sorry isn't a good enough excuse, Danzo remarked, as he turned to leave. We will be increasing your training in perception. You must be able to see when someone is lying to you, Naruto. How are you ever going to become a shinobi if you simply believe without a fault? I understand, sensei. Danzo nodded, and then left. Naruto remained quiet, until the weight on his left arm shifted slightly and a small moan came from that direction. He watched as Sakura slowly shifted her face, having used the sides of his bed as a pillow. There was a wool cape over her shoulders, as outside the moon shone brightly. He didn't frown as much as stare perplexed while the girl slowly opened her eyes. They glittered in the light reflected from the moon rays. "And Naruto?" she whispered, her voice croaked. "Hey," he replied with a smile. There were tears running across Sakura's face, as she instinctively hugged him tight, before starting to cry on his shoulder. The rays of the moon shone over this picture filled with relief. And somewhere, a voice spoke cut in the darkness. "Orochimaru-sama? We await further instructions. Check the description for the links to the author."